The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
The following program is closed captioned for the thinking impaired.
By tomorrow, I will rule the world!
You think he's gone? He's not gone. That's the whole point. He's never gone.
Is this some radical new therapy?
You see?
Well, I must have not been paying attention when you were just talking to me. Do you think that you could repeat the question?
All right.
Listen more attentively.
You guys good to go?
Good to go.
We're ready.
Excellent.
Phones are off. Hi, how you guys doing? My name's Tom Duggan here at the Paying Attention Podcast. Hi, it's up Two Guys Smoke Shop at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Want to thank our sponsors, and I don't have them in front of me, so I'll do like a couple now, and then I'll pull them up when we're talking. We'll do another one. We have Marcoux Towing, Jason Marcoux, who brings hot chocolate to the TMF family dinner for the homeless in Lawrence for us every Wednesday night. We appreciate him. Century 21 McLennan and Company, Janet McLennan. We love her. We love Matt and the whole family. They do a lot of things for the community, and they're always saying, when they do stuff for the community, I'll shoot over like an instant message to Matt or somebody and say, hey, can you give me some details? I want to write about what you guys just did. And they're like, no, we don't want any credit for that. So we always like to give people credit who don't want credit, because too many people do things for the credit, and we always want to make sure we give credit to the people that aren't doing it for that reason. Who else do we have? We have the Superior Officers Union, Methuen Police Superior Officers Union. We appreciate their undying support, and we'll get to the others shortly after we do our first round of, right, Ed?
That is absolutely correct.
All right. And I'll be able to see it up on the screen anyway, right? You've got those things. Oh, and Climate Design Systems. We can't forget Nina. She never answers her phone, but we still love her. We still love her. Climate Design Systems. If you have a heating HVAC issue, it's getting really cold. So if you have a problem with your heater, you might want to give Climate Design Systems a call. And they always answer the phone in the office. She just doesn't answer her cell phone anymore. So my name is Tom Duggan. This is our 3-year anniversary, 2-year anniversary.
Yeah, it's not 3.
So it's our 2-year anniversary today.
Correct.
And on our very first podcast, I've been doing the Paying Attention radio program for 30-something years. We moved it over to podcast a couple of years ago, and this was our first show. And we asked the police chiefs of 4 different communities to come on and talk about the opioid crisis. And it was such a success. And by the way, we still get like 100 to 150 hits a week on that podcast, because it's still up. So I know people are still interested in the topic. So I thought, what better way to celebrate our 2-year anniversary here at the Paying Attention Podcast, high atop Two Guys Smoke Shop at Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, than to have the police chiefs come back and talk about where we were 2 years ago when we were sitting here, and where we were maybe 5 years ago, and then where we see the trends going in each of the different communities. Who we have with us today, I'm going to go from your far right, my far left. We have North Andover Police Chief Chuck Gray, who's also a Valley Patriot Bash Officer Tom Duggan Hero Award winner. We have Chief Jim Riter, who I think is in the running for that maybe next year, I think.
Should be.
From Boxford. We have Chief Alan DeNaro, who encrypted his police scanner, and we're still fighting about that in between every break. He's the chief from Haverhill. And we have my good friend, and I say that because I know it pisses off a lot of people, but my good friend, not just a guy that I know from the business, but he's a guy I've known for a long time and I trust, and that's Methuen Police Chief Joe Solomon, who is here with us today. So, gentlemen, since we were here a couple of years ago, why don't we we'll go like one at a time. Introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about your community, how many people you have in your community, and talk about where the opioid crisis is in your community now compared to where we were 2 years ago when we were sitting here. I will start with that Chief Chuck Gray, who I'm going to be seeing tonight at the menorah lighting, for those of us who want to join us.
Correct. I see us 2 years ago. I talked about North Andover, first of all, demographically, with 30,000 people, 26 square miles, running from the Lawrence border to Boxford, Haverhill, and Andover. And where we saw ourselves was we had the crime secondary to the opiate crisis, meaning we had a lot of the shopliftings, car breaks, house breaks, and stuff like that that people were using to acquire funds to then go to the city and make their purchases. Also, the traveling back and forth, the OUIs, we've seen an increase in those as opposed to OUI liquor. We're actually seeing more OUI drugs. And again, a lot of times the crime secondary with the increase in larcenies and shopliftings, and people say, oh, it's shoplifting when they go into Kohl's. But I'm sorry, if you go into Kohl's with no money in your pocket and take $1,000 worth of merchandise, you're not shoplifting, it's larceny.
Right. They're decriminalizing that in California.
Right.
What do you think of that? I mean, is that not insane?
It is. I mean, obviously, it's the business is going to pass the buck on to the people that are buying the stuff for real. So.
Right. So as far as where we were, opioid deaths and opioid related arrests in North Andover, is that going down? Is it going up?
So the trend, and I've talked to some of the other chiefs, so I know we're on the same page. The trend is we're getting less reported overdoses, but we know they're going up. Just from speaking to people on the street, just listening to families, a lot of times because they're getting Narcan from community outreach, and they're getting their own Narcan from Walgreens and stuff like that, they're not calling us anymore. So we're seeing a reduction in the number of reported overdoses, but we know it's gone up.
So I'm looking at the graph that you sent us, and the first one is month to month. It looks like January, July, and September seem to be really big response months for you guys as far as responding to opioid calls. And I actually noticed in our movie, you had a couple of your guys took the movie producers to really, really nice neighborhoods and showing, people think that people who are addicted are out in the woods. They're all homeless. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them are very affluent.
Right.
And they're overdosing in their basements, like on Bear Hill Road, I think was one of the places I saw in the movie.
Correct. Yep. And that's absolutely the fact. And this disease doesn't, pick on people that are homeless or whatnot. It gets everybody, and it doesn't matter.
When you guys have to deal with somebody who's either overdosed or they're addicted and they've committed a crime, what is the procedure? What do you guys do with them? Can you section them right away? Can you put them away? Can you send them to a detox? Or do they have to want to go?
We can send them by the new protective custody laws that would change. We can send them to the hospital. But once they get to the hospital, they can sign themselves out. And most of the time do. And then from there, it's back to square one. The only time they're getting help is if they want it.
Right. Right. Chief Riter, you're the chief in Boxford. I imagine, I heard that you guys had, there was a cow stuck in the road one day. And it was like a big.
Those are beer drinking cows.
It was it was a 9-cruiser response team.
We don't have 9 cruisers.
That's a crime. That's a crime spree. No, you don't even have 9. No, that's funny. But in an affluent community like Boxford, a beautiful community, especially in the wintertime, driving through Boxford is just so beautiful. I would imagine it also touches you guys. I mean, you're not Lawrence, right? And you're not Haverhill. But I would imagine that it does touch a small community like Boxford because there's so much money, right? And drugs are expensive.
It absolutely does. And I could speak for some of the Masconomic community because Masco's in Boxford, which serves the towns of Topsail and Middleton. Mm-hmm. I spoke with their guys. And we're seeing a dramatic drop in the number of new addicts, but still the age group between 25 and 35 that got addicted in the early part of the epidemic, those people are still out there. We did have a fatal this spring of a young lady that passed away who was in recovery for a period of time, but unfortunately she used again and she didn't make it. So it's out there, but what we're dealing with...
What was the age range?
I believe she's about 23, 24.
Yeah, young kid, right?
Yep, exactly. So got addicted at college, came back, was fighting addiction for a period of time, and then passed away.
Now, are you seeing what North Andover is seeing where the use is actually going up, but the reported incidents are actually going down?
We're not getting that many calls for services. We're not using as much Narcan as we used to. We're not getting the calls. So it's...
Is that because people can carry their own Narcan now?
Probably
they don't need you guys to...
And the people that are addicted, they have a better understanding of their addiction, so they're not calling the police. They're not calling for our services. So overall, just between the two guys that have spoken so far, would you guys say that the opioid crisis is starting to wane, or is this still spiking? Is this still out of control?
I would say so.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing, it's more in the communities. We've caught up with it, I think, with the education. The schools are starting young. The different groups are getting out there. And with the background these kids have and fairly solid family dynamics, I think a lot of them are getting the message. So what I think it's helping in our community, absolutely, and I'd say for Topsail and Middleton, the same thing.
As a side topic, because I'm always interested in this prevention stuff. My personal opinion is I don't think it ever works. Anti-bullying prevention, all this stuff, to me, it just seems like a waste of money. Are you seeing any kind of bang for your buck in the schools? Like, I'm sure you were making arrests in the schools. You've got a vocational school. Is it Masconomet? What is it?
Masconomet's the high school. The vocational school's over in Danvers.
Okay.
But you still have the trainings and 6, 7, 8, 10 parents show up sometimes, more or less. You're out there, but I believe it is getting out there through different groups. It is, but it's absolutely when you have those meetings and you get the parents of the kids that probably never have an issue that show up. It's sometimes disheartening for the people to put those events on, but they're getting it out there, and I think the message is grabbing hold a little bit, at least with the kids in the Tri-Town community. We never really saw it inside the high school. What we were always seeing is kids would go away to college and then get hooked and then come back, and we would see them when they made it back to their parents' house and were battling the addiction.
I see. So they go off to college, probably experimenting with a lot of stuff, get addicted to something, come home, and then you guys have to deal with it. You got it. Now, Chief DeNaro from Haverhill, very different type of community. It's much more of a community like Lawrence. It's much bigger. You have a lot more crime. It's a big city, although people don't usually think of it as a big city. You look at the area, it's something like 8 times the size of Lawrence. And you guys are dealing with the gang issues and the distribution issues much more, I think, than North Andover and Boxford. How is the opioid crisis impacting your community now as opposed to 2 years ago when we were here talking?
Well, it's still a significant problem that we're facing. As far as deaths are down, and that's because, as you've heard before from this panel, Narcan is out, it's readily available, and it's used quite frequently. Also, a lot of the addicts are now using places like McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, Taco Bell, those type of places to shoot up in bathrooms because they know that if they overdose and they're by themselves, they're going to be found quickly, which means that we have a quicker response. Mm-hmm. I mean, I will tell you that
so they're strategically doing that like in a public place, so if they OD, you guys can find them?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Wow. There are some that will actually go in a hospital, into the bathroom in a hospital and tie their arm around the help cord. So if they pass out, the cord will go off that they need help and someone will go in. I mean, it's a serious problem. We've doubled our Narcan that goes to officers because we're finding that 2 doses in a pack isn't enough sometimes. We're doing 3 and 4 because people are becoming resistant to it. So we're having to carry more Narcan in the cars. We have less overdoses on stats, but that's because people are now self-medicating for it, so we're not getting the calls. But it's still a significant problem. We are still making multiple arrests in Haverhill involving people from New Hampshire, Maine, and Lawrence. Lawrence being the delivery side. People from New Hampshire and Maine are coming to the 5 exits off of 495 to conduct their business because they feel it's safer in Haverhill to do that. They're not going all the way to Lawrence, but the connections are coming through Lawrence.
So now with what's going on in Lawrence as far as them encrypting their scanner, putting cameras everywhere, it seems like they've driven a lot of the gang activity out of Lawrence and into Methuen and Haverhill. Have you seen, since Lawrence started doing that, and of course we all know if we ask anybody from Lawrence, there's no crime in Lawrence at all. But we have seen a significant decrease in the crime because of the cameras, because of some of the other things, and it seems like it hasn't solved anything. It just moved them to your community.
Well, I don't know that it has to do with the cameras or the encryption. It's more or less Lawrence is 6 or 7 square miles, and they have about 150 police officers. Mm-hmm. You know, I would need 450 police officers if you wanted to do it by square mileage. So when you have that many officers in an area of 6 or 7 square miles, you can be much more responsive to addressing those problems, and that in itself pushes it out of the community. And when the state police come in, and they come in wolf packs, and they address issues, and you have sheriff's office and other local and state partners, it will drive things to where there's less heat. Mm-hmm. So yes, things do move out, but then they go back to Lawrence. I don't want you to think that there's an issue in Lawrence. They're doing a great job there, and then they all leave Lawrence, and then they stay in Haverhill or Methuen or Amesbury.
So it's very transitional.
Absolutely. Same thing with the gangs. We see the same thing with the gang issues, that they come in and out of probably a half a dozen communities as they need to, and they go back and forth.
Is there a way that you guys can have some kind of a regional approach to this? If the gangs are moving from Lawrence when Lawrence gets hot, and they move to Haverhill, Methuen, and then when Haverhill, Methuen get hot, they move back to Lawrence or some other community.
We do. We all meet on a regular basis. Our detectives talk daily. Matter of fact, the chiefs from 3 or 4 communities, we got together with our mayors last week and had a meeting in Haverhill on on gang-related violence and issues. And we all talked about best practices and things that we're doing in our communities and things that we're doing together. So we do those things. We don't necessarily publicize them as much as do them.
Yeah. Chief Solomon, very, very tough community to be a police chief and be a police officer in. I was at the shooting the other night on Broadway and Center Street. It seems like a lot of the crime, before it gets to Haverhill, as it moves out of Lawrence, goes through Methuen first. And it's going to be very frustrating. I watched Linda Soucy at the city council meeting a couple of weeks ago talking about possibly getting some cameras in the Arlington neighborhood, looking for any kind of strategies the good people who live in those neighborhoods can find to try and stop the flow of drugs, which then brings the flow of violence. How have you seen the trends since you were here 2 years ago and today?
I think the trends are totally different on the crime situation as the drug situation. So for us, we've had about a 50% decrease in the amount of calls for services for opioids. We believe a lot of that is the availability of Narcan. We also believe the excellent work we'll be talking about later from the whole Merrimack Valley. Everybody's community engagement work is getting together and addressing education, treatment, the distribution of Narcan. So what we're seeing on the opioid side, at least from us, part of it is the great work everyone's doing to get education treatment and long-term treatment. The other part is the calls are reduced because of the number of Narcan. So what's interesting is every community, although we're together, is so different.
That's why I love having all you guys up here, because four different perspectives on the same issue.
So we're down about 43% in calls for service, 43% use of Narcan, 50% increase in deaths.
Wow.
And that's a couple of those.
50% increase in deaths?
Increase in deaths. Wow. So although it's 8 to 11, which is like a 48% increase, it's what I've looked at the numbers were people who hadn't called. They went to bed, used, and we found them deceased. So having the availability to Narcan and somebody with you, as Chief DeNaro said, doing those things, we find them in public restrooms also.
Yeah.
The hospital thing's kind of unique because it gets them their service right away. So we also see for us, in 2017, we had 275 support calls from our community engagement specialists, our clinicians. This year, as of December 3rd, 429. So it's like a 55% increase in their outreach and community engagement.
And yet deaths went up.
And our deaths went up, but a lot of that is people coming to us for help. We've already placed 158 people this year into treatment. I think, though, the deaths are the anomaly that somebody used and went home by themselves to bed, used, and just died in their sleep, which is what at least 2 of those 3 deaths were. As to the crime issues, and we hear what we're saying, everyone's impacted differently. So what we found is those cameras made a significant difference to us because the border crime in the Arlington neighborhood, they're literally coming one street over. Because if you look at the stabbing you were at, then you look at the shooting, you put us a couple of blocks away.
Yeah, like 4 blocks.
But here's the difference: camera versus no camera. So luckily today, I can tell you we do have video of our shooting.
Oh, you do?
And I was just apprised on the way here.
I'll be putting in a public request for a copy of that.
We have investigatory video that was provided by somebody, and I believe we've identified the shooter. But if we were at Lawrence, we would have been able to pull up our own video. So as you saw 2 months ago, we went to City Council. We have $272,000 in a fund that they've now designated to use for public safety, but I can only get $10,000 at a time to use for cameras. So hopefully, as the new administration comes in,
that's all political.
We're going to start to deploy cameras in that area. But here's our problem. We deploy cameras in the Arlington neighborhood area.
It just moves up 5 more
It's just going to move up further. So there has to be more solutions. But interesting, as Chief DeNaro said, and with all the departments, we've had multiple gang task force drug meetings. So we all have different officers in our team. They're all working together with state probation, parole, federal probation, parole, the court systems, the intake workers. Everybody's working together in order to attack this as one large problem, rather than you can't have a Lawrence problem, a Haverhill problem, a Methuen, Boxford. Their problems are ours, although they impact us differently. It's the same players and the same problem, but it's funny how I'm in between Lawrence and Haverhill, and I'm impacted totally different in a community by the crime as they are. So, and also we're down offices. We're a smaller force, so we only have 94. We're down several offices. We have Haverhill that's been hiring the last few years. Lawrence that's been hiring. So as it continues, if Methuen doesn't come to the call and start adding officers, there's going to be a long-term impact to that.
Have you seen a correlation between the increase in opioids use and abuse over the last few years and the increase in homelessness? I mean, I know once somebody becomes homeless in Methuen, they go to Lawrence, right? So they're not walking your streets usually. But they're still Methuen residents, and there's got to be a stat on that, I'm sure. I'm sure you guys track that somehow, right?
And that's been very difficult. We've been trying to, particularly with Karina and with Lawrence officials. So once a year, we go out and do our count for the homeless, but they do the count every November. So we keep telling them, the Fed's got to do the count in the spring, because if you do my count in November, there's nobody along the rail trail because they've all gone to shelters in Lawrence.
That's too cold.
The count has to be in April or May, so I can get a true count of my numbers. But we patrol the rail trail. Our officers go out there on foot. They're out there constantly, and particularly in the good weathers, we interact with people. And again, if we have to get them help, we've got to go to Lawrence in order to get them a shelter. And that's not fair to Lawrence either, that all the homeless from all this area goes to one community. Each community needs to share in and have their own resources. I know I've heard you talk about it, but nobody wants to take that step to have their own.
Well, I think your new mayor coming in, Neil Perry, has expressed a serious interest in addressing that problem. We see if somebody's in North Andover and they're living in a $750,000 home, and then all of a sudden they lose their house or their wife throws them out and they become homeless. There's no services in North Andover or Methuen or Boxford for those people. So where do they go? They go where they think the services are, which is Lawrence, but Lawrence is so inundated that there's really no services. I mean, there's no beds at daybreak. I mean, you call Karina any day, they have 55 beds and they're full every single day. The Lazarus House only takes families, so if you have no kids, you're not getting in. If you're a single person, you're not getting in. And the others, Good Shepherd and stuff, only really open when it's like below freezing, and it's only like for like a 1 or 2 night thing until it's no longer freezing, and then they throw everybody out. The issue, Chief Gray, with homelessness and the spinoff of the opioid crisis, are you seeing an increase? I mean, I know you've got some serious issues in certain areas and small pockets, especially over by the railroad tracks by Merrimack Street. There's a couple of others. What are you seeing?
I mean, we had a camp down there 2 years ago. It was actually like a little village of homeless people, and all we did was go down there and interact with them. We made a couple arrests, when people were using and stuff, and we basically told them, how can we help you? But like the chief said, a lot of times they go to Lawrence, not just for the services, but I also think because it puts them closer to the source. So because they're struggling with that addiction, if they're in North Andover, it's going to take them 40 minutes to an hour to walk to the city to try to get some product to use it. If they're there already, sitting, underneath the railroad bridge on Lowell Street, they're right there. So I think it's a matter of convenience too.
Now this is yours. This is the one you sent me, right?
Yep.
Just want to make sure I'm not reading the wrong one. So I've got overdoses, 233 from between 2015 and 16. 247.
No, that's mine.
I'm
Is that
sorry.
yours?
This is
Okay,
Alan's.
yep.
Okay, I thought I had yours. All right,
Seems a little high.
I'll come back to yours.
All right.
Chief Riter, small community, right? Really, really quiet. You probably feel like why am I even here, right?
No, I enjoy it, Tom.
Oh, you do? All right,
Absolutely.
okay. But there must be some spin-off crimes that come from the fact that people are using opioids in your community, whether it's stealing cars, breaking into places to steal something to sell to get drugs.
We're not seeing it.
You're not seeing it.
We had our first house break in 2 years, about a month ago. And
so if you're going to move somewhere, I guess Boxford's the place to go.
It's one of the safest places in the Commonwealth, right there. But there's nowhere close. There's no shopping centers. There's nowhere else for them to get food, restaurants, or whatever else. They're very small. There's not much, for anyone that doesn't live in a house in the community, there's not much there. There's nothing to attract them. If they move into the woods, you'd never see them, and there's no one else with them.
Right.
So they're moving into other communities. But we see, kids that grow up in Boxford, if they start having issues, they're there for a short period of time and then they move on. Same with families. If the economy is turning south or there's a loss of a job or something like that, they don't stay that long. They move on. So people come and go as far as fairly quickly out of the community if they do have a downturn in their luck.
What happens if I'm a Boxford resident, I've been living there my whole life, been paying taxes, suddenly my wife throws me out, or I lose my job, or the bank takes my house, and I suddenly become homeless? Are there any services in Boxford for Boxford residents who suddenly become homeless?
No.
There aren't?
No. We have a good council on aging for the older folks in town, but very limited for anyone else.
Is there any effort at all by the Board of Selectmen, by the town manager, any of the town fathers, to try and address that problem, or is it just not a problem?
It's just not a problem. We just haven't had it. Well, people sometimes they'll stay in their house for a period of time while it's foreclosed on, but eventually even the banks seem to make some type of agreement where they almost buy them out of their house.
Wow.
We'll let you know, okay, we'll give you this if you leave, and they pack up and move on. There's several houses in town that have been foreclosed on. People do stay there for a while, but then they move out, and these obviously the houses are, $600,000, $700,000, 800,000 plus that they're looking at. So if someone's trying to get those people to move on, there's some funding.
Are all of your guys trained to use Narcan?
Yes.
Because even though it's not much of a problem in your community,
Yep, we have it.
And every cruiser has them, but you've not had a chance to use them though.
Well, we've used Narcan a number of times. It's quieted down, but we're using probably about 10 doses a year for the previous 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And then it's just
you are having an issue with the opioids. It's just that it's not as many.
It's just not as many, but now we're only seeing the legacy people. We saw it if you look at the high school age kids. We saw the classes from about 2011 to 2016 get really banged up right after high school. Mm-hmm. Then after the class of 2016, it's really quieted down. You're not getting the calls from the parents for services, hearing about kids that came back from school having a lot of issues, coming back from college, moving back home. We're just not seeing it.
Right. Chief DeNaro, and I have these here. Thank you and everybody sent me one. We'll pull them up on the screen at some point during the show. We're looking at overdose deaths is actually, according to the graphs that you sent us, 32 overdose deaths between 2015 and 16, only 16 overdose deaths for opioids between 2016 and 17. Then it spiked up a little bit between 2017 and 18 to 17. It's down to 12 for 2018 and 19. Is this a trend, or is this more because of what you guys were talking about earlier as far as fewer people reporting it, more Narcan, fewer people needing to actually reach out for services, which actually would create these numbers?
No, I mean, deaths are reported. I mean, when you die, they have to call us. So those numbers are regardless of what's going on with Narcan, but the numbers are lower because of Narcan.
Okay.
But just to go back for a second, you hit something on the head, which is very important. You could probably do a half a dozen shows on homelessness. And one of the issues that we see is that who do we deal with that are homeless? People that have alcohol abuse, drug abuse, mental health issues. We have a couple of locations that we can take them in Haverhill, but if they had a problem there before, they're not allowed back. If they go in and they smell booze, they're not allowed in. If you leave early, like let's say you have to be out at 7 a.m. If you leave at 5 or 6 in the morning, then you're suspended for 3 days. You can't go back in.
I see.
So
there's rules. I mean, there
are rules.
To follow rules.
The problems that you have is that people don't like homelessness. And by what I mean by don't like is there are certain places in Haverhill, for instance, they'll go under bridges, which nobody really sees. Sometimes they go on the parking deck. Now, people come in and out for work. They call, we're afraid, we don't like people in there. And then we'll get calls, get them out of there, get them out of there. So the problem that you have is that if you're homeless, okay, we can't expect you to walk 24 hours a day.
Right.
We can't tell you you
gotta
can't
sleep
go to the
sometime,
library,
right?
you can't go on any city property, you can't go under a bridge, you can't go in. You have to allow people an opportunity to sleep, especially when they can't get into a facility for whatever the reason. The facilities all fill up. Mm. Now, in the winter, when it goes below about 20 degrees, our officers go out, and anybody that is out on the street, they have to come into the lobby in the police station. It's not even an option because we've had people freeze to death. We'll find them behind dumpsters the next day. So we kind of mandate that they come in, and sometimes we can have a half a dozen people sitting in my lobby area until 7 in the morning when the sun pops up.
Do you have problems with trying to get them to go? Because I would imagine a lot of people who are homeless, who are addicted, maybe have warrants, or they're afraid they might have warrants and might not want to come with you because, hey, look,
our problem's the opposite.
They're saying I'm going to be in the lobby, but I might end up in a cell.
No, ours is the opposite. It's getting them to leave. Oh. Because we end up giving them donuts and we give them coffee, and sometimes they don't want to leave. We get a crowd coming in.
It's a good get for them.
So I mean, it's something that we have to be mindful of also, because it is a place of business that people need to come in and out of, and I can't set up a shelter in my lobby, but we do bring them in extreme cold conditions. But homelessness is probably one of the major issues that I mean, everybody from San Diego to Miami is dealing with, and nobody has solved it.
Right.
Nobody anywhere in the country
That's
has
because
solved it.
that's because there were no politicians even trying to solve it.
I mean,
at any level.
Well, the problem you also have is that we just had a gentleman show up in the mayor's office last week, checked himself out of a nursing home. I don't like it here, don't like the people here, I'm out of here. Well, he's got no money, he's got no ID, he's got nowhere to go. He shows up in the mayor's office. What are you going to do for me? Get me an apartment. Well, we can't get you an apartment. Everything we tried to do was a no. We ended up having to commit this gentleman. But in 3 days, he'll get out, if not less.
Because they can sign themselves out.
And then the problem is still there. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know how you take care of homelessness where there's nobody left on the streets. And that's something that we're all facing.
Right. Well, I mean, I would imagine it would start with political courage, right? You guys are in charge of enforcing the laws, but those who are in charge of making the laws, those who are in charge, like the mayors and the state reps and the state senators, the governors, all the way up, it seems as though every day I'm hearing there's some new bill that got passed. It's going to solve the opioid crisis. They throw money at the problem in one program or another, but we're seeing there's no results.
Well,
there's
Tommy,
zero results.
You have to remember that, especially with things like the opioid crisis, just like with gangs, the things that we're doing now, we're really not going to see the benefits of those for probably 8 to 10 years down the road, because we have to see these children growing up to see where they go, to see how successful or unsuccessful they are. So things like that, it's very difficult to determine whether or not it's a success or not. We have people, we work with NFI. We go out every time there's an overdose. We go out and see the person who overdosed, and we talk to their families to try to get them the resources. And I can tell you from personal knowledge that we have met with families, and they've said, this is his 5th time going in rehab. This is her 4th time in rehab. So it's not the type of thing where you grab them, you talk to them, you get them in rehab 1 or 2 times, they're done. Some of these families have literally bankrupted themselves trying to save their loved ones, and it could take a half a dozen times.
Yep.
And the biggest part of the problem is that if we get to you and we get you squared away, and you go right back where you came from with the same environment, the same friends, what do you think is going to happen?
Right.
And so those are the challenges that you face, and you try and you say, let's take care of the opioid problem. It's a lot more complicated than that, because there's so many spokes in this thing that it's very difficult to resolve.
Chief Solomon, dealing with the shootings, the crime, the regular day-to-day stuff that you have to deal with, while all that is going on, your officers then have to stop when there's an overdose somewhere at the McDonald's bathroom or wherever. You have people that you deploy that aren't police officers that are now dealing with this. And we're going to bring them up in a few minutes, but
Yes.
do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So back in 2013, we started on the project. By 2015, we had 2 civilian clinicians full-time, and one of them is here with us today. We've tried for the last 2 years to get a full-time mental health counselor, because obviously, and I know Chief DeNaro talked about it, the addiction, the mental health, the homelessness, everything's all grouped together. There's most of our overdoses we see a dual diagnosis. There's some type of mental health. There's also an underlying injury or something that related to the opioid use. So again, I spoke earlier, they've done 429 intakes this year already since January 1st, just 2 individuals that work for us. So if there's an overdose...
When you say intakes, you mean people that have overdosed that you guys have sectioned?
Yes, or have come to us and asked for help because of a prior overdose, or the families reached out to us. So there's multiple stages. There's an overdose, they respond. If they're not here, they respond as soon as they're back on call or back to work. Some of it is family outreach. Some of it is we've outreached to you 5 times, you've said no, and then they call Jackie or Cole and say, I'm ready. Or Jackie and Cole do their 30-day updates with them, and they say, I'm ready to come in and talk to you. What's very interesting, and I know you had said nothing's been done. The truth is the problem was so out of control. A lot has been done to get us to where we are today. But as Chief DeNaro said, it's a long-term impact. It's going to take some years to see what happened. But when you see 429 interactions where prior to having this in 2013, it was phone calls to my office by someone who says, my kid overdosed, my nephew has a drug problem, and I would literally spend a day and a half to try to get somebody help or figure out how to do it because we didn't know what we were doing. When we brought in the civilians who were trained in that, they literally set them down, do the intake, get the statistics, make the phone calls, get them placement if they want to go. So something that might take me a day and a half might take them 2 hours. So we're making huge progress.
So can someone just walk into the Methuen police station right now? They've got an addiction problem. They're on the rail trail. They're watching us on their phone. Believe it or not, they all have cell phones. I don't know how every single homeless person I know has a cell phone. And they're watching us now, and they're saying, you know what, I'm going to try that. I'm going to go to the police station. They walk into the station. What is the process? How does it work? They walk in, and what happens?
They walk in, go right up to the window, tell them what their issue is. They're looking for some help. And if one of our clinicians is working, they'll come right out to help them. If not, the officers will take them in. They'll start the process. We'll get them to the hospital, which is our first step. Then we'll call one of our clinicians in. They've done such a good job training the officers. The officers can go right to the hospital and start the process. I still think there's a weak link, at least for us, getting them to the hospital and still we're a lot better off than we were 2 years ago when they'd say, take them, we don't want them, where they're actually trying. But we got to get beyond that 72-hour hold, because after that 72 hours and they're being released, where are they going? I still believe if there's an overdose and we have to deploy Narcan, it should be mandatory, 72 hours in the hospital, then right off to a minimum 30 days, and then evaluated by a doctor before you're released. So we are getting better. Senator DeZoglio has been amazing in this fight. We've been, I know some of us have been to the State House to testify on the bills that she's put up in on her committee. So she's, not only is she a fighter for the addiction, but the homeless and the mental health. So with her guidance and with her assistance, I'm sure this is going to continue to go. But again, for us to have the success we've had since 2013 in the legislature in Massachusetts, it's been wonderful. It just needs to go a little bit further than that. And I know people don't want their civil liberties taken away from them, but we have to save these lives. And when you look at how out of control everything was in that 2016 year, the year of 2016, everything just seemed to go crazy. And I bet you if you had Lawrence statistics here, it would overshadow all of our numbers.
Yeah.
So we're much better off than where we were, but we're nowhere near we need to be.
But are we really better off than where we were when it seems as though the numbers are still spiking, even though we know the calls are going down, but we know why, right? Mm-hmm. So is it a false sense of security that things are going down? When I look at the trend line on mass.gov, it looks like the stock market. I mean, where we were 2 years ago and where we are now is like here, but the line's going like this.
Well, everything's cyclical like that, and everything has its ups and downs. Again, I can only speak for my city, and I think where I say it's getting better, 429 people wouldn't want help 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It was a fight. You Narcaned them, and they were fighting with you because you took their high away. Right. Now, with the use of Narcan, we're seeing people self-asking for help. Please, can you do something for me now? I can't do this again, because if I do it again, I'm not going to make it. And we've had our people that have 6, 7, 8 overdoses.
I was just going to say,
we've had 3 generations in the same family, in the same house, overdosing repeatedly and refusing help.
The family that uses heroin together?
But, these things happen, and it's unfortunate. But, again, it's a multifaceted attack. I still say that there's a failure of the health system. The health departments need to get involved. I know the state health department is doing things, but this isn't a police issue. This is a health issue.
Right.
And where do you ever see a panel where there's health experts, health nurses, health directors attacking this? Oh, yeah, they come to our meeting, the meeting quarterly. Everybody talks, but just because we're here 24/7, we shouldn't be the people that are the face of this. Right. We're the face of it because no one else wants to do it.
Well, that's why
quite frankly, we're not that trained in this. Even though what we've learned, I would much rather have the clinician, the nurse, the health director, who should be taking the lead in this, and all the follow-ups, the civilians, not that we don't love them and they don't do great work for us, they should come under that umbrella where they have more resources. One of the issues we have is still that the police outreach of training and giving away Narcan, where we have to do it through the civilians because we can't do it. So if it was the health department,
you guys can't give it away?
We're still having a problem with it in our community being authorized to give it away. Not to say departments aren't doing it, but a lot of the departments that are doing the training by law enforcement and giving it away have that little bit of a legal problem. So we're just trying to be careful because Methuen is Methuen.
One thing I refer to
I watch your council meetings. I understand.
I'm the help desk for our community. I'm sure the other chiefs are. We handle everything.
Right.
Because we're the people that are open 24 hours a day. We get the calls, and that's what we do. And back to, as far as the expense of taking care of treatment, I know 2 different families from my town that they spent upwards of $100,000 to get the treatment. And not only that, from their treatment, they learned that they got to make sure their kids should never come back to the area. They've actually packed up and moved so their kids could never
Smart
come
idea.
back and hang around with the kids that originally got them addicted, or that pot of kids that got them in the wrong circles as they went along.
You know,
through
it's,
life.
I'm so glad that you bring up the environment, and I think Alan brought it up too, because I remember reading. I used to subscribe to a magazine called Psychology Today, and they had maybe about 15, 20 years ago, they had a big study out where they tested mice and they got them addicted to cigarettes. And then they weaned them off the cigarettes and they got them clean. And then they put one back in the same exact environment that they were in when they got them addicted to cigarettes. They put another mouse into a totally different environment. And the one that went into the same environment went back to it immediately. And the one that went into a different environment never went back. Yeah. And I think that says a lot about the way people who are trying to get clean. My sister went to 5 different rehabs before she got clean. 5 different rehabs. She was a missing person. We had the FBI out looking for her. I mean, some of the people at this table know. And it wasn't until she found a faith-based rehab. She went to Teen Challenge in Haverhill and Bradford. And it wasn't until she went to that faith-based rehab where they teach you, it's instilled upon you that there's a higher power, that there's something bigger and better than you and more important than you, where she finally got clean. She's been clean, I think, 3 years now. And she spoke at the TMF family dinner last night for the homeless. She does a lot of homeless outreach, too. How many of them are there out there, though, is my worry is my sister got lucky. How many of them are there out there? If someone comes in tomorrow and says, hey, I want to go to a faith-based rehab, where do you send them? Nobody, huh? Wow.
No, we have people that have lists of these organizations.
Right.
And just a matter of getting them connected. We don't turn anybody away, like Chief Solomon said. We're not turning you away. We will figure out where to get you, and we make sure that happens for you. But you have to have the drive and the desire to do it. I don't want you to think that they're kicking down the doors to come in for rehab, because they're really not. It's just a matter of when they hit that point. I mean, we've had people overdose 2 and 3 times in a day.
That's crazy.
So, I mean, it's just a matter of...
Yeah, they've got to be sanctioned. Chief Gray, we talked 2 years ago about the Angels program in Gloucester and how that started. Can you just talk a little bit about what that is and what you think of that? I think most of the chiefs here at the time said they were not real happy with the idea. We're 2 years away now. We've got a little bit more of a perspective, maybe a 30,000-foot view on it. What do you think?
I think that the district attorney, Jonathan Blodgett, pretty much gave us marching instructions, because that program was basically granting immunity for some crimes, and we don't have the authority to do that. So if someone has warrants and they have drugs on them and stuff like that, we can't just turn a blind eye. That's the job of the district attorney's office. So again, it sounds in principle like a good program, but it has a lot of gray area, if you will.
How does it work, that Angels program, for the people at home that might not know?
My understanding is if you walked into the Gloucester police station and you had drugs on you or committed a crime or something, that they would bring you into treatment and not charge. And so the problem with that was, what about the victim?
Right.
And so when you get into that whole aspect, that's what the DA's office is for, the victim witness advocates and how they conduct their business. That's their purview. Okay.
We have a system. I think Methuen's involved, Haverhill, Amesbury, Salisbury. Their communities may be involved also. I thought it was more of an Essex County thing, where we've kind of mimicked the Angels program in that we have the ability to let each other know if somebody from Methuen comes into Haverhill and overdoses, and that Methuen gets notified of that, so they know about what's happening, so they can reach out to them, because we may only see them in Wendy's,
right,
type of thing. So, I mean, we do have a program set up that is similar to that without the amnesty aspect of it. So if we do find people that need to be directed for assistance, we can get them to facilities and to counseling and that type of thing. So we do have a program. It's just not the Angel program.
Right. Anybody else on this Angels program idea?
Well, again,
giving amnesty and letting people just go.
So, Tom, I tend to be sometimes that rebel rouser type of guy. And quite frankly, when Chief Campanello started that, I had no problem with it. I talked to him right at the beginning. We had started ours a couple of months before that, just doing our own outreach. And here's how I look at it. This is my disagreement on that. If my drug unit's out on the street right now and they grab me buying drugs, not selling, buying, they have the ability in the law to take the drugs, turn me, and have me go buy drugs. Although they get me help, they can use me as an informant. What's the difference between that, in my mind, and you come into the station with a small amount of drugs, not quantities, a couple of bags, and you want to get rid of the drugs and get help. So that's where I've had that problem. I truly believe the reading of the statute allows a police officer discretion to charge or not charge. It's not amnesty. It's the ability to charge or not charge, which means the district attorney, the AG, could still charge you because I didn't. But if there's no drugs, you can't use it. But I'll say this. From all my conversations with the chief back then, from the time he had been there, he was only there a couple of years, you know how many times he told me someone came in with drugs? Zero. Because what do they do before they come in? They use it. Because they know they're going. So in my understanding from talking to him, now I never followed up afterwards. At the beginning, it was more of, hey guys, come on in here and I won't lock you up. Now, as to warrants, they would not charge someone if they had a warrant. But let me tell you, there's no chief. If someone walked in with a murder warrant or a rape warrant, we weren't going to process them. We were going to lock them up. You come into my station now and you want help and you have a warrant for operating without a license or shoplifting, we're going to get you the help. And when you're released, we're going to pick you up and we're going to take you to court. We're going to clear it. Even if you come in, we can call the clerk, process the warrant, bail you, all within 45 minutes, and still get you treatment. But I think what Lenny did, Chief Campanello at that point, was he used that as the, sometimes you need the draw, the spark, it's the pop that gets people to come. So he used that to get the media attention, to get the word out. And I think there was way too much focus placed on the fact that he was doing something that was outside of the scope. Right. And what we've seen from Parry throughout the whole United States, the Police Assisted Addiction Recovery Initiative, where everyone's calling the Angel Program, it's like Chief DeNaro said and the other chiefs, we all have something like that. And I think one of the best things we have, as Chief DeNaro said, is if there's an overdose in Methuen and you live, I don't care if you're in Worcester, and they don't have a problem, we're calling Worcester to tell them. So we're communicating. And how many times have we talked about the failure to communicate or lack of communications? Right. Police communicating not only with crimes, we're now calling, we'll call Chief DeNaro's people and say, hey, we just had an overdose from your community. We got them at the hospital. Do you want to send your people? We'll process them. And then even if not, they don't have anyone, they'll do the follow-up afterwards. And one of the things I've seen around the country that I think has made such a difference, and even not even around the country, but Plymouth County in Massachusetts is doing this really well, but I've seen it around the whole country. Wherever you live, if you overdose in our community, police departments are calling that other community and saying, you have this person who lives in your community. We just got them in help. They're at this hospital or this treatment. Can you do the follow-up? And if you study the Plymouth County program, which is the Angel program, twisted a little bit, where they don't give it amnesty, but all the community meets constantly. They do these diffusion meetings where they share information, but every single overdose from wherever you live, you call that other police department like we're doing. That's how you get the help, because now, think of this, if you overdosed in Haverhill, then you overdosed in Boxford, then North Andover, then Lawrence, and no one told us, how would we know enough to do the intake? So that's one of the biggest breakthroughs, I think, of the program, is the joint cooperation, which requires memorandum of understandings and an understanding of confidentiality and the HIPAA laws. All that stuff has been resolved through MOUs, but that's one of the biggest successes I've seen in all these programs, is us talking to each other about who needs help rather than who's a criminal.
Chief Gray, 2 years ago we were here, the biggest thing that was on everybody's mind was fentanyl. It was just really hitting. Now we're 2 years away. What has changed? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse with the fentanyl, the heroin that's laced, the quantity, the strength?
The fentanyl's gotten worse, I would say, and it's the strength. It's more and more potent. And they're having other stuff coming out that we're getting bulletins on carfentanil, which is even more potent. And, we talked about the Narcan we're carrying. All North Andover officers have 2, and they carry 2 for not only a victim, but what happens if they get with transdermally or whatnot, they ingested, they need something for themselves too.
Sure, yeah.
And we all know, one is none and two is one. So
Right.
it's definitely, it's getting up there. And again, with the fentanyl, it's I think worse than heroin because it's synthetic.
Right. And in North Andover, I would imagine, because it's a little bit more of an affluent community than Lawrence, you guys probably see more the distribution side, the people who are making it, the people who are selling it, laundering their drug money by buying maybe a nice house in North Andover or buying a business in North Andover. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I mean, the biggest thing we're having is more of the using. And again, we're right next door to the city, so it's easy to go over. We get the travel through traffic, residents from other towns that cut through, to avoid major thoroughfares so they don't get stopped. And they're coming back into town, they're using it, parking lots sometimes, bathrooms, again, the same thing that happens in Methuen and Haverhill. And not so much the business aspect of it, though, because if they are selling, it's more middling to support their own habit.
Same thing with you, Jim. I'm sorry, Chief Riter. It's an more and more affluent community. Do you see more of the money laundering? We
just find the users. We find it's generally
really
just a child comes home from wherever, and that's where the addiction starts.
Yeah.
A few times with older residents that may have got hooked through starting off with the painkillers, and then worked their way that way. But the last 2 deaths we had in town were both more tied to fentanyl than actual just the opioids.
What's the biggest? What are the biggest crimes going on in Boxford? If I'm thinking of buying a house in Boxford, and you and I having coffee before I buy my house, what's the biggest issue that your department deals with? Like, beside all this opioid stuff, like what?
Speeding.
Really? So it's mostly traffic stuff.
We're a cut-through town. If you're going from Hartford, Connecticut to Bangor, Maine, and there's a backup at the bridge in Haverhill, they'll cut through Boxford to go over from 495 to 95.
Right.
So we're very isolated to a number of these issues, just where we don't have a downtown with a lot of stuff that we don't have.
Do you have a lot of traffic stops where you have trafficking going on, where you pull them over, you find out they've got stuff in the trunk,
limited. No. Generally, it's commuting.
Really,
morning and the afternoon.
Chief DeNaro, do you have a canine? You have a canine crew, don't you?
We use Methuen or the sheriff or the state police.
Now, why is that? Like, I thought that was going to be a yes answer, and I was going to move on to the next question.
No, we do not have a canine.
Is the mayor afraid of dogs?
No, I don't think he's afraid of dogs. It's just that right now our manpower is such that I really can't afford to send somebody off to the schools, and we have North Andover has one. Methuen has the sheriff.
Chuck was the canine officer for years and years, right?
I was a canine. I retired 2 dogs when I was in Florida, so I'm very familiar with canine.
Yeah.
It's just that right now we have the ability to utilize other canines around us, so we don't really have that pressing need.
Right. Would you take a dog if we could get you some support on the city council? Would you take a canine?
I would say we would take one when we get some more people on. Okay. I mean, right now.
So now your staffing is your big issue.
I'm 21 in the hole right now.
Wow.
And I've got 5 or 6 slated to retire in the next year.
Wow.
And we're having a huge problem hiring people. I mean, I had 21 spots for this next academy. I'll be lucky if I get 13 or 14 in the class.
And is that because people with the environment, the anti-police environment that's around, that fewer people want to go into policing? Is it because it's harder to get through the process of becoming a police officer, or is it something else?
I think it's multiple things. I think it's that. I think it's also the new generation of potential work candidates has an entirely different mindset on what a career should be, and it's just very difficult right now. People are not. When I came on the job, you worked someplace for 25 or 30 years, and you got a pension. We have people come on now, and in 2 years they say, I think I'm going to do something else now.
Right.
What do you mean you're going to do something else?
I mean, it's a thankless job. I mean, listen, I've had cops in my whole family, my whole life. It's a thankless job you guys have. It's tough. It's a tough job.
Yeah,
right. And nowadays, everybody has a phone. Everybody has a camera. Everybody records you. There's a lot more pressure, and this job is different now. As I said before, we now primarily deal with drug addiction, alcohol abuse, mental health, homelessness. That's the police officer's wheelhouse in places like Haverhill, Lawrence, Methuen. That's what we deal with daily. That's not what you saw when you watched T.J. Hooker on TV and everything else. Right. All right, they had all kinds of fun and did things.
Hold on, I never heard of that guy.
We're not doing that anymore. We're not doing that anymore. So it's a different type of job.
Would your job be easier if the politicians weren't demanding that you guys be social workers? Because that's what I'm hearing, is that you guys have basically become social workers. Would your job be easier if you could just deal with responding to crime, which is what policing is supposed to be, than doing it this way? Or do you see a benefit to doing it this way?
No, I see a benefit to doing it this way. You have to be in touch with the community, the people, and their needs. They don't need us to arrest them and write them tickets. They need us to assist them in getting the services they need to be successful in their lives.
I was surprised all four of you went like this when I asked that question.
I mean, that's why our school resource officers, I have, I believe I have 4 in the schools, 3 in the schools right now. Actually, I have 4 in the schools right now, and they are doing phenomenal work, especially with children. I mean, they're impacting them, they're impressing them. Sometimes they're the first positive contact they've had with a uniform officer is somebody in the schools, especially my middle school SROs. So I think that's an important part of this job. It's become one of those skills, those life skills that when we look at you to hire you, we need to make sure you know how to deal with people and how to relate. I mean, we've had to add a component to our field training program, which is 12 weeks, where we actually have to teach the kids today how to talk to people. Because we say, you go do a bar check. You go in the bar and you walk around and you talk to people. You take a look around and see how they're doing. Well, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Well, what do you mean you don't feel comfortable? Well, because they like to do this. They text.
Right.
So we have to actually get them out of that texting mentality and teach them how to relate to people. How do you talk? Look people in the eye. Talk to them. See what's going on. Drive with your window down when it's not 3 degrees outside.
Our society is doomed. We're just doomed. When you have to teach people how to interact with each other.
All of us came on the job probably about like 21, 22 years old, and we went from being whatever we were to police. And that's what we did. We didn't have to be taught how to do it. We had the communication skills, and we moved on. With my job, with midnights, that's what the younger guys generally don't want to be on the midnight shift. I would have been on the job 15 years before I could have gotten to midnights, because that's where all the senior guys were back in the day.
Right.
Because they'd take the overtime, they'd take the details.
Right.
It's just far different. And the communication skills are huge. And I went 3 years after I was in high school, I was back at high school as a police officer. And it wasn't anything that was out of the ordinary to me. I walk in, there I was. Now I'm a police officer.
Right.
And we work together. Now it's just a much more of a learning curve, and some people just never get it.
Chief Gray, you were the canine officer for a long time. I remember the first time I saw you, I knew who you were. And you were arresting a guy. The dog took him down, and the guy took a swing at you. I think I said it at the bash at the time. I would have taken a swing back at him. I was watching the way he was treating you. And it's like such a professional. You slapped the cuffs on him, treated him respectfully, put him in the cruiser. Now that you're chief, do you have other canine officers? How many do you have, if you have any? And how intricate is that in when you have people driving through from Lawrence to Haverhill or wherever that are trafficking it or going into a home where you think there might be something there?
Canines, I've always thought they were, it's the best part of the job for me, first of all. But like Chief DeNaro said, though, there's canines all over the place. So when Lawrence had just got their canine, it's going to be it's a patrol dog right now. But ours is patrol and EOD, because when the head trainer of Boston PD calls you as a former pupil and says, why do you want a drug dog? Do this, because you can use these dogs, like you said, that the Sheriff's Department, State Police. So by multi-training these dogs, that way if Chief DeNaro needs an EOD dog, he can call me. And if he needs a drug dog, he can call Lawrence.
What's EOD?
Explosive ordnance. That's the gun dog. They're sniffing out for
explosives.
Yeah.
And you have like the airports right in North Andover.
Right.
You've got a lot of industrial areas where you would probably need that, right?
Right. But I think it's an awesome asset to any department. And right now I have one. I'm looking to hopefully add another one.
Where do you see this crisis 5 years from now? Is this going to get better? Have our politicians? Do they have some kind of a handle on it? Have they put things in place where 5 years from now we're going to see, or is this just going to keep going?
We're talking about the opioid
thing
again. I don't know. I'll give it a push. I don't know yet.
Anybody?
Time will tell, Tom. And again, think back of the crack epidemic we had.
Right.
And we sat around when all this started, and we sat around we called some of the older cops and said, I came in as that was had reached its peak and was coming down. And said, "What did you do to fix it?"
Right.
Trying to figure out how it got fixed.
Well, they didn't fix it.
They didn't.
We
It
just replaced it with a
switched.
different drug.
And that's actually what they ended up saying.
Yeah.
So hopefully, the problem to me is more than the heroin is the fentanyl. And that's really the supply of fentanyl is what's really killing
Our
people.
heroin arrests are turning out to be 100% fentanyl.
100%.
They're not.
Really?
They think they're buying heroin.
Yeah.
They're buying fentanyl.
Wow. And if they'd shot it up, they'd be dead.
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on.
Can you
how
shoot
it's
100%
mixed.
fentanyl? Can you?
It depends on how strong the dosage is that you're getting.
What he's saying is that instead of heroin that's cut, it's fentanyl that's cut with something.
Right.
So we're seeing the same thing, and where you would see a small percentage of fentanyl. Now even our pills, someone thinks they're buying an OxyContin, oxycodone.
Right.
It's actually not. It's fentanyl that's cut with something else. So that's really what pushed this.
Now, there's supposed to
into
be
the
another
danger
drug coming out now that I'm starting to hear about. Not the carfentanil, but now something else. There's some other drug. Do you guys have any familiarity with that? Is something supposed to be stronger than carfentanil?
Not sure, but that's going to be the next problem we have. What comes next, where it came from, and what gets out there to try to get in front of it.
Isn't it?
Synthetics? When you're talking about synthetic drugs, they can just create.
And that's stuff that's just made in a lab somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So they can really make whatever they want if they want to. And then you guys are the ones that have to do all the cleanup.
If it starts as a mild version of what that drug is and starts on your college campuses, gets moved around, gets more addictive over time, then they all come back to the community.
We don't do the cleanups. We have hazmat teams, the FBI, the DEA, state. I mean, we don't even go in. If we see that we have a meth lab or we have something else that's of significance, we seal, evacuate, we get out of the area and let them do it.
Now, how closely do you guys work with the state and federal agencies? I know they're in Lawrence all the time. I see them. I talk to them. I'm at some of the raids. We have a great front page story today about some of the gun raids that they did. But I would imagine they're probably in Lawrence more and maybe Haverhill more because that's where
State police, the U.S. Marshal's office, DEA, they have desks in my detective bureau.
Oh, they do?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's fantastic. You guys, same thing?
yep.
So you guys all have other agencies working directly in your departments that are kind of working together with you guys?
We have our officers working with them. So we have an officer assigned to the FBI task force, which is doing all the drugs, gangs, and that specific officer brings all the information back to us. Everybody does it a little bit different, but interacting with the state and the sheriff's department, it's a constant, because if we're not, then on the gang issue and the drug issue, particularly those, if we're not working with the federal and state partners, and particularly the sheriff's office, because of the wealth of information that comes from them from housing everybody, that's really how we've been successful to curb some of the violence, make the arrests, and do some of the interdiction.
Right.
Because we talked all this about what we're doing to help people. That's only half the problem. The other half of what we're doing is the interdiction, because there has to be both sides, or it's not going to succeed.
How frustrated are you guys that there's now a trend toward not having a consequence for committing crimes? We're seeing it in California. We're seeing it in New York. Decriminalizing. It's almost reversing the broken windows theory, where there's no consequence in California. There's people defecating in public. There's people.
Aren't you seeing it in Suffolk County?
What's that?
Suffolk County.
Suffolk County, Massachusetts. Okay. Oh, right, because of
The DA.
She's saying she won't prosecute.
The new DA is pro-criminal. So how frustrating is that for you guys? Because now that's a tide that's going against everything.
But we haven't
you're trying
seen
to,
that. I mean, John Blodgett does a phenomenal job in Essex County as far as prosecutions and the whole judicial system. Where our senior judge just retired, Steve Abaney, and the chief judge came into Haverhill and met with myself, my prosecution officer, my patrol commander, to ask us what we would like to see in the new judge coming in. So they're being very responsive as far as trying to work with us to accomplish things. So we're not experiencing that yet, or at least I'm not seeing it from Haverhill and Essex County side. Plus, also, like Chief Solomon said, I have officers in the DEA, I have officers at a U.S. Marshals, I have officers in the FBI, and anytime we can take a case federally and get it out of the state system, we take it federally.
So now you're saying, and this is contrary to what I thought, you're saying that you get a lot of support from the judges, and what I'm hearing is that you guys go out there, you do all the hard work, the prosecutors do all the hard work, and the judges are letting them go. They're giving them suspended sentences, and they're right back on the street.
Juveniles. Mostly that's juveniles.
Okay.
We also got the outreach from the chief judge also, so they probably went right to Haverhill, being the largest city in Haverhill District Court, but they reached out to all the smaller communities. They had a meeting up at the court for the other chiefs.
Right. And then you're in Lawrence, not in Haverhill, when you go to court. How do you find it in Lawrence? It seems like, from what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm wrong because sometimes you hear things that are wrong, you guys do all the hard work, the prosecutors do all the hard work, and they're back out on the streets.
Well, again, I mean, that's the courts as far as what gets brought up as far as evidence, and how, is it really benefiting someone to lock them up and throw them in jail for 2.5 years when they could be going through the diversion program that the DA has set up, and instead of letting them out on the street with no consequence, they're out in the street, but they have consequences hanging over their head. Mm-hmm. So even though it appears that they've been let go, they're not. They have to go to classes, they have to do community service, and the whole program, the diversion program, is great because now they're actually letting adults do it too. So it's taking them out of the system as far as the jail, but it's making them have consequences to deal with their actions, mm-hmm. and it's kind of almost benefiting the community.
Our biggest problem is juveniles, because now that they're saying you can't prosecute them,
right,
the criminals are using them to carry their drugs, carry their weapons.
Right. Yeah.
So that's our biggest problem.
So now, are any of you veterans? Is anybody here a veteran? So I have a good friend, Donnie Jarvis, who lives in Newbury. He's a veteran and has been trying forever to get me to do a story on the Veterans Court. I didn't even know there was a Veterans Court. And I think you were the one that first told me. Yep. And then I called Donnie, and Donnie was like, yeah, you got to come down. You got to see how this works. Can you talk about that? So everything that we talked about, if you're a veteran, it's very different, right? If you've served your country, you've been honorably discharged, you're in Boxford, you get pulled over, you've got a couple of grams, 30 grams of fentanyl in the car. What happens?
As far as what happens, I don't know, but we do have the outreach process where we get them in touch with the Veterans Administration guy, and then he'll help them through the process. It's just, we've only had it a few times with OUI arrests, very basic stuff. It's never been the drugs. And they've kind of taken over the process and helped the veteran through.
I think it's more slated, as the chief said, for misdemeanor type crimes than it is for, say, trafficking type crimes, or something serious like that. Mm-hmm. I think they get, like the first time, I think they get a pass of some kind where it doesn't go on their permanent record, and I don't know that they do that for trafficking cocaine.
Is there a separate drug court? I know some states have a separate drug court where you're not going to Lawrence District Court, or you're not going to Haverhill District Court. You're going to some separate.
Haverhill has a drug court.
Oh, so you do. So how does that work? Does Lawrence, yeah. Oh, they do. Okay. So how does that work now? Instead of going before a judge for a regular crime of assault, battery,
you go
whatever,
in front of the judge for the crime, and then the judge will then decide on what type of program to put you in, and I believe it's for first offender type of thing.
Okay.
So you can't be on your third dealing arrest and then come in and get a break.
Gotcha. Joe, you and I've been giving them more time because we're going to bring up some of your civilians here.
You don't have to worry about Joe's time. Don't worry.
Joe gets a lot of time. But you're living you're patrolling a community that is unfortunate by location, right? You've got Lawrence to yourself, and you've got New Hampshire to the north, mm-hmm. which means you get the people coming from New Hampshire going to Lawrence. They got to cut through your community, and then they buy their drugs. Sometimes they shoot up while they're there, and then they're driving through your community to go back into New Hampshire. And so you're getting a lot of that, and you're also getting, I think, a lot of labs and homes that are being used to produce and package. I know of like on House Street, you guys had a big DEA raid last summer. And by the way, thank those guys too. They were really good to us when we were there at the scene. We just happened upon it. We just happened to be there when it was going on.
He happened to be there when one of my guys called him before they called me.
Well, we never give out our sources. But listen, I'm very grateful that I have a lot of friends in law enforcement that are always trying to tip me off. And I always go out of my way to stay out of your way, to stay out of the way of the feds when I'm at those things. And I've even had guys say to me, well, why are you way over there? And I'm like, because I'm trying to be respectful. I'm trying to stay out of your way. I'm not the Tribune. I'm not going to walk up to you at a scene and throw a microphone in front of your face while you're trying to do your job. But it must be frustrating for you to be the victim of circumstances where by location, no matter what you do to handle the drugs that are going on in your town, because of where you are, you're always going to have that traffic running through, and you're always going to have the problems that come with that. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. So, but 5 years prior, go back 5 years before then, we used to say we're in the triangle, Lawrence, Lowell, and Haverhill. Now it's more of Lawrence, Haverhill, and Manchester, New Hampshire. But we also have a significant amount of action that comes from Maine. And because we have 495 and 93, we're getting it on both sides of the city. But what we just had a couple of weeks ago, someone called and says, hey, it was kind of strange. I saw a U-Haul pull up to this house that I don't really think anyone's living in. They were loading all these boxes, and when they left the door open to the house. So we sent a car over to check an open door. Somebody must be moving. Complete stash house.
Wow.
Full of stuff. Can we imagine what was taken in the U-Haul?
Right.
Plus, there was edibles. So it was the first time we found, which were marijuana.
I remember that was on
edibles.
West Air Street.
Yeah, West Air Street. So,
and the owner of that house gave me a lot of crap on Facebook when we reported that. It was all a lie. We were making things up. He was going to sue us. We're still waiting to hear from him.
So what we're seeing because of all the work, particularly being done in Lawrence, we're seeing the stash houses in Methuen or the gun house. So they do the shooting in Lawrence. They come to Methuen to ditch the guns, but then we get the call. So whenever Lawrence has a bad incident, whether it's a gang-related fight, a knifing, or a shooting, we're prepared for the response. Because the response usually has to come back to us.
Like a retaliation hit.
The retaliation, because they come back to retreat to our locations.
Right.
And we've been seeing a lot of those issues. We had those issues at 91 Broadway, which again, the shootings at 91 Broadway, one of them was connected to a shooting on Manchester Street in Lawrence, and then they were connected to some gun running out of New Hampshire. So we're uniquely placed in our community is really diverse, where it's a real city of those 14 streets in the Arlington neighborhood. Then as you cross Lawrence Street and start to move, we go from the multi-tenements to $800-900 million homes. So it's a totally different type of policing that you have to use on the same shift on the calls. You got to call at 9 a.m. and then you got to call at 11, but it's 4 blocks away. The officer has to be able to switch on how they react and how they develop that call, because there's such a diverse action that's needed based on the two different communities. So I credit our officers. They do an amazing job. I'm very proud to be able to work with them. All of them, the detectives, the specialists, the officers in uniform, everyone's doing great work. But again, it's part of where you are. But it's a location where you have an opportunity to use a lot of different ideas because you have so many different things happening.
So now I know you have a lot of political problems in Methuen.
No, come on, get out of here.
And I want to throw this across the board. How frustrating is it for you? You're out there trying to be a police officer, and you get dragged into politics. You're constantly fighting for funding. You were talking about for the cameras earlier, or canines, or whatever it is in your budget. And you have city councilors or other elected officials that are constantly trying to cut your budget or make it look like you guys are doing something scurrilous when you're not. How frustrating is that when you're trying to be a police officer and you get forced into being kind of a politician?
Well, I think you can't be a police chief unless you understand that part of your life is that you have to be in the political realm. But very indicative of Methuen. This past July, they gave us the custodians that work at the PD. They said, we're going to give you the custodians. And I said, no, I don't want them. They belong in the DPW. Well, they gave me 2 custodians with salary, cut their overtime, which runs about $30,000 a year, and cut supplies. So literally, there's no toilet paper. There's no soap, because they just decided we're not going to give you that money. That's the political impact that affects the quality of life of the civilians and the police officers. When you don't have basic supplies to wash the floor or put toilet paper or hand soap in, that affects the morale of the officers dramatically, which is an intent on some of the politicians to disrupt what you do. But yet I give them credit. They go out there and do their job.
Right.
But that's the type of politics that's dirty and is very caustic in my community. The regular politics that a chief has to go up and sell the vision to a city council, I've never had a problem with. In fact, I welcome that because it gives you the chance to say what great work they're doing.
Well, you're a better man than that, because I watch the way they grill you, and very disrespectful, very accusatory, and you stand there and you take it.
Well, I think we have to in our positions. And it's funny, it kind of goes back to when you were talking about how the judges and the prosecutors treat cases. If you ask the patrol officer about a specific case and the outcome, and you asked us, we might have a different viewpoint because we're looking at it in the big umbrella where they're looking at, I spent all this time, I chased this guy, I went through neighborhoods, we walked through the woods, we locked him up. We got to court, and 3 months later, he's in some diversion program. That's garbage. Where we're looking, saying, well, that's a first-time offender. This is going to get the person the treatment they have that they need. We don't have to, our officers don't have to deal with them 25 more times. So everything comes to perspective.
Guys, political support in North Andover, Chief Chuck Gray. I know you've got a great selectman in Phil of the future, Phil DeCologero. You have a new town manager. I haven't met her yet.
She's awesome.
Is she?
She's awesome.
So how do you see the support from the local officials, elected officials, especially whereas North Andover seems to be kind of leaning a little left, right? We used to be a very conservative community. We're leaning a little more left now. Have you seen any change in the support of the police and what you guys are doing on this opioid
Not
stuff?
at all.
And everything
We get
else?
a lot of support from the Board of Selectmen and the town, the new town manager. She's really stepped up the game and impressed me. We have a deputy town manager who's the same way. Just a lot of support.
So when you guys put in requests, like Chief Solomon wanted some cameras, or he wanted a dog, or he wanted, I don't know, like a janitor, you don't get the same kind of political pushback in North Andover that they get in. How about you, Jim, Chief Riter?
My board has been nothing but excellent since I've been there, but some of it's the fact that I've always been very fiscally conservative anyways. When I took over as a lieutenant, the first thing I took over was the police budget. So we live within our means, and by doing that, when we ask for something extra, they've been very receptive to it.
Oh, that's great. Now, I know I'm throwing you in the soup, Chief DeNaro, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What kind of political support or roadblocks do you get, whether it's the mayor, you don't have to name anybody, but whether it's the mayor, the city council, the elected officials that you have to answer to? Methuen's Haverhill's very political, and I've watched some of your meetings. I've listened to some of your meetings, thanks to WHAV in Haverhill. What's it been like? How frustrating is it, or how easy is it?
Talk about cameras. We have over 200 cameras.
Really?
So we.
So how come nobody did? Has anybody covered that?
No, it was covered a while ago.
All right.
Quite a while ago. But we were the first in the area to have cameras.
All right.
So it's something that we've done. We've gotten support to do. Our biggest challenge is manpower. We are way understaffed for a department our size and the needs that we have. We have received recently, I have received some commitments from the mayor to look at that for the next budget.
To look at it. He's going to look at it. He's going to study it.
Get back to me in May because, his initial is he would like to see us at least put on another 5 or 10 officers.
Yeah, but you need 21. that's.
Well, no. I'm talking about on top of the 21.
Oh, okay.
My issue is I need to make sure that if you're going to put 10 officers on, you don't say, okay, well, that's 10 officers. So we'll take that money instead of buying the 13 new police cars you need, we'll put on police officers. I need to make sure that we're not like Chief Solomon just said, don't give me something, but then take something else away because then that's not a benefit to the agency.
Right.
So I will see how it goes in this budget year. We're going to start working on it. We usually start working on the budget by early February.
Okay.
So I will know usually by the beginning of May where I stand, and I'll let you know then.
Well, I did a story about 5 years ago. You were nice enough to give me a tour of the station, all the problems that you were having with the physical part of the building, the leaking, the mold. We took pictures. You talked about some of the officers that had to go out for lung issues because of the mold, the black mold that they were. Has that been rectified? Because
completely.
It has.
We have all new windows in the entire building. We repointed the brick that needed to be redone. We have a new roof on the building. All of those things are done. Our challenge right now is we're trying to build a new animal shelter because the one that we have is embarrassing.
Really?
And we'll kind of leave it at embarrassing because that would be another whole podcast on that alone.
All right.
But that needs to be redone. We're trying to come up with funding, and we're hoping that in this next budget, the funding is in place that we can knock that building down.
Chief Gray, we're getting ready to wrap up. Unless you guys want to keep going, you have some other stuff you want to talk about. But
we got the rabbi at 4.
That's at 4? I thought it was 5. All right. So for people who are watching, who have a family member who's struggling with this, maybe they've tried to help them and they've failed miserably. Maybe they're estranged. What kind of advice do you give to the family members of people, and they're everywhere. Everywhere you go, everybody that you talk to knows somebody that's been touched by this. What advice can you give to the families of people that are struggling with this? Maybe they're homeless, maybe they're not, but they're at least addicted. What do you say to those people?
Come talk to us. If we can't, the chief said, if we don't have the answer, we have the resources to find the answer. And whether it's just a consultation, these are your options. We have a mental health coordinator now in North Andover. She's actually out of the police station most of the time. She's available to talk to someone in the lobby. She has talked to people in the lobby. It doesn't hurt to ask. And just reach out. We're not going to go, start a case on it and, arrest their way out of this problem. We're gonna help you. And that's what we do.
So if someone's in North Andover, they're addicted, or their son's addicted, and they come to the station, they can say, hey, listen, I don't know what to do. Can you counsel me? Can you show me what can I do? And you guys can at least try and steer them in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Same thing in Boxford?
Absolutely. What we find, like with the courts, with the schools, with the police departments, we're all working in our own world as far as what we do, but our goal is all the same. We may have to get to it a little differently, but everyone there is ready to reach out and help, because we're much more in deal with the mental health, the addiction, than the crime than we've ever been before.
Where do you see this 5 years from now?
The scary thing is what comes next. What's the next drug that's going to come out there we're not prepared for?
Right.
Where's it going to come from?
How about total decriminalization of drugs? You hear this now. Nancy Pelosi's talked about it. AOC and some of the crazy Democrats have talked about it. But I always say never to dismiss anything out of hand. Let's think about it and talk about it and kick it around. What do you think?
It's not going to happen in my career.
No. Good idea, bad idea. Would you guys have an easier job, an easier life if these things were all legal? Fentanyl, heroin. I mean, look, Massachusetts made friggin' menthol cigarettes illegal while they're setting up heroin injection sites, and it makes no sense to me. But okay, I'm open-minded. Let's just think about it, right? Would it make your job easier if drugs weren't illegal?
I'd have to guess it would make it more difficult. No doubt about it.
Chief DeNaro?
You know what? I want to go back to the last question you asked about what do you tell people. And when we have fatalities involving overdoses, one of the most common things that we try to tell people and that we find is that they were embarrassed and didn't want to reach out for help, and they tried to handle it themselves. And a lot of times it ends in a death. And if the advice I would give people going forward, reach out to us. Don't try to handle it yourself. It's bigger than your family. It's bigger than the skills that you have in place to deal with. I mean, we've had kids who were taking their grandmother's china and heirlooms and pawning them for drugs, and we'd reach out and we get the door shut. No, we're going to handle it ourselves. And then children end up dead, and they come back and say, I should have listened to you.
Right.
So, I mean, that would be my big takeaway on what to tell people. As far as legalizing drugs, just from legalizing marijuana, I'm seeing a whole plethora of nightmares out there that we're dealing with.
Really? Can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, I know
you don't have enough time for me to talk about that. I'll be perfectly honest with you.
Can you touch on it a little bit? I think it's a
I could touch. I mean, Chief Gray is an expert in this as far as just the driving under the influence. We now have little entrepreneurs set up we just had a home invasion where a delivery guy showed up at a house and he saw there was 20 or 30 plants in the house and came back with a shotgun and shot a round off trying to steal the guy's plants. Wow. We have kids now that are opened up their own businesses doing the dealings. We have put in place, because I believe that the legalized marijuana places are so expensive. Maybe people in their 40s and 50s professionals are going there, but the kids aren't going there.
Growing it themselves
and selling it.
Right.
So, I mean, we do have, this has spawned an illegal operation of little entrepreneurs who are out there dealing pot. It has not been successful in places like Colorado. So the long answer and the short answer to your question is, I don't think it's going to be a success if you legalize everything.
We're seeing a cottage industry build up with the high school kids just with the e-cigarettes and all your vaping stuff. They'll put it out, they'll get the Venmo account, they'll let kids know when they're going somewhere as they're driving to New Hampshire to pick up their supplies. They'll be letting them know what they want, how many, bring it right back. So everything you do, and as things move around in government and how things get regulated, there's always someone that's going to try to take advantage of it, and definitely doesn't generally benefit us.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to have Chief Solomon's going to have one of his civilian what is it called?
Community engagement.
Person is going to come up. I want to thank Chief Gray from North Andover, and please tell the rabbi I'm going to be a little late, but I will be there at the menorah lighting. Chief Riter, who's now turned out to be one of my friends. I don't know how that's happened, but it did. And
because you made a big mistake the first time around.
I did, because I kicked the crap out of him in my newspaper one day, and he called me out. Yeah, right. And Chief DeNaro, you're still encrypting your police scanners. We need to have another conversation about that.
First of all, I learned that from Joe Solomon. First thing he told me, he says you need to encrypt your radio.
It made me look better.
But I do want to expand this conversation at some point about the marijuana. Would you come back to talk about that?
Joe would be happy to.
Joe would be happy to. Thank you, Chiefs, very much. I appreciate it. When we come back, take a very quick break. When we come back, we have Joe Solomon and some of his civilians that work with outreach with the. I don't know, I screwed up the whole thing, and he just told me what it was. But we'll be back in a couple seconds. This is a 30-second break, so please don't go away. A&M Auto Body. We got our friend Angelo over there. Angelo Memolo over there. He does great work on your car. So if you got a ding in your car, somebody hit you, you got a mechanical problem, you bring it to A&M Auto. He's on South Broadway in Lawrence on Inman Street. Angelo will take care of you. So what's the address there?
341 South Broadway, Lawrence, Massachusetts.
I don't know why these guys love me so much. I really don't. But Twin Lights, let me tell you how dedicated I am to helping my sponsors. The guys at Twin Lights Security needed an extra security guy to do private investigations and to do security for a certain thing in Boston. And they posted it on my page and asked if it was okay if they could use my page to solicit hiring people. And I said, you know what? As busy as I am, these guys sponsor the show. They sponsor the Valley Patriot. They give us $1,000 for the bash. I'm going to go work for these guys. So I called up Pat McLaughlin and I said, look, you help us every single time we need something. Whenever I put out a call, you're there. If you need an extra person and you're short, I'll take the night off and I'll come work for you. And so I have been. I've been doing some work for them because they're helping us. And so there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to find a way to help them in the meantime. So if you need security or if you're getting divorced and you need a private investigator, if you have a business and you need a private investigator or security, you want to call Twin Lights Security. They're based out of Gloucester, but they're very local. If while I'm driving around Lawrence, I get shot and killed, make sure you get my body to Perez Funeral Home because we do business with the people who do business with us. And he's on South Broadway with it's the old Scott Funeral Home. If you're an old-time Lawrence resident, it's the old Scott Funeral Home on South Broadway. Perez Funeral Home at 298 South Broadway in Lawrence. They do crematory services. They do all the stuff that they're supposed to do, right? And Mike's a big fan of the show. He followed us when we go live. He's an advertiser now in the print edition of the paper, and he's now sponsoring this program. Perez Funeral Home and Crematory Services, 298 South Broadway in Lawrence. We appreciate him. A&M Auto Body. We got our friend Angelo over there. Angelo Memolo over there. He does great work on your car. So if you got a ding in your car, somebody hit you, you got a mechanical problem, you bring it to A&M Auto. He's on South Broadway in Lawrence on Inman Street. Angelo will take care of you. So what's the address there?
341 South Broadway, Lawrence, Massachusetts.
I don't know why these guys love me so much. I really don't. But Twin Lights, let me tell you how dedicated I am to helping my sponsors. Alrighty. Crazy day today, day after Christmas, our 2-year anniversary edition of the Paying Attention podcast, High Top 2 Guys Smoke Shop here at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. And we are sponsored today by McLennan Real Estate. We love McLennan Real Estate. They do a lot for the community. AFC Urgent Care, we missed them last segment, but we want to make sure that we give a big shout out to Lisa Williams and everybody at AFC Urgent Care. They're celebrating their 7th anniversary, by the way, I believe, in North Andover. We love AFC Urgent Care. Way better than sitting at the Holy Family Hospital or the Lawrence General for 4 hours in their waiting room. Marcoux Towing. We love Jason Marcoux, and he does a lot for the homeless in Lawrence. Marsan and Son Construction. We want to thank Ronnie Marsan, former city councilor in Methuen. We're really trying, Ed, to get him to run for city council in the East End against Steve Saber.
You think he'll do it?
I think he will, actually.
Right.
The key to getting him is convince his wife. And so I've been working on his wife really hard to get him to run again, to see if we can't get him to throw Steve Saber out of office because he's nothing but an obstructionist. Climate Design Systems. I'm actually live talking to Nino while we're I'm on Facebook and we're chatting back and forth throughout this opioid summit. If you have a heating problem, HVAC problem, you want to make sure you give Climate Design Systems a call. The Methuen Police Superior Officers Union, I love these guys. And you know what I love even more about these guys, Ed? The fact that they're sponsoring my show is making people absolutely insane. People are calling sound off in the Tribune, and they're like, Duggan's sucking up to them, and he's giving their side of the story, and he's on their side. And well, listen, I'm between a corrupt politician and a bunch of cops, I'm always going to side with the cops.
Makes sense.
I'm sorry, that's just kind of who I am, right? So we want to thank the Methuen Police Superior Officers Union for sponsoring the show, and I understand that they're going to be the arbitration for their contract has been pushed into late January, so the new mayor is going to be coming on board. Hopefully he's going to be able to work with them to maybe it won't have to go to arbitration. Maybe they can just work that out. I know you had nothing to do with that contract at all, right? I mean, you get blamed for everything because you're the chief, but I'm pretty sure you had nothing to do with that contract, right? Anybody ever ask you that? I know they accused you without even asking, so I'm just going to ask.
Well, they accused me of writing it, so.
Oh, right. Did you write that contract?
No.
I was
on
you went in the back room with the smoke and the cigars saying, yeah, and $20 million. And
the scotch.
And the scotch, right? So we want to thank our sponsors. We really appreciate it. And I want to thank the other three chiefs who were here earlier in our last segment. Chief Chuck Gray, who's a Officer Tom Duggan Hero Award winner at our charity bash a couple of years ago. Chief Alan DeNaro, who I work, believe it or not, very well with, even though we encrypted his police scanner. We're still kind of working on that a little bit. But he does a great job. And the fact that Jim Ferrantini hates him makes me love him even more. The fact that his mayor hates what he does makes me love that guy even more. Again, I'm always going to side with a police officer over politicians. Any 7 days a week. And of course, Jim Riter, who is the chief of Boxford, and by the way, Jim, who threw that little shot at me on his way out the door, I didn't get it wrong. I just didn't have your side of the story. And once we had his side of the story, we did print it. Chief Solomon, you have been really kind of on the forefront of a lot of different police communities in trying to get civilians to work under the umbrella of the police department to try and address this opioid issue, because as we said in the last segment, or at least as I said in the last segment, cops are not social workers. And I don't really think cops should be social workers. I think cops should be out there arresting people who commit crimes. And it's great to have civilian social workers working with police, but I don't think it should be the police. Now, the four chiefs that we had disagreed with me, I still think I'm right, but I'm open-minded about it. But you did something a little different. You brought civilians under the umbrella of the police department, and you have two of them here. Why don't you introduce them and talk about how this has worked?
Sure, Tom. So again, thanks for having us on the show. And I have one of my civilians, Jackie Ingersoll, here. The other one is Officer Mike Havey Jr., who also works very heavily in the community engagement department, and he's one of our Narcan experts. So
and I see he's got the canine patch, so you've got a dog. Where's the dog?
I do, in the car right now.
You should have brought him in.
She's probably eating my corn muffin.
I would have loved to have her on the show, my first dog on the show. Breaking ground here.
So maybe we'll do that because we have 4 dogs.
Oh, you do?
So maybe we'll do that.
So North Andover has none. Lawrence, I think, just got one.
North Andover has one.
They have one now?
North Andover has one. Haverhill has none. Lawrence has one.
Lawrence has one. And you have
4. We have 4 explosive ordnance dogs.
You probably shouldn't have said that. McCarty will want to cut that next out of your budget.
And we have a bloodhound for tracking, and we have a patrol dog, a German Shepherd.
Right.
At this time, we don't have a drug dog, but that's why there's so many drug dogs out there.
Right.
We just call for one.
Right. And you can go through the Sheriff's Department has quite a few.
Sheriff's Department, State Police. There's plenty of other local departments that have drug dogs. But, an EOD dog between Officer Mike Havey and Officer Tim Getchell, with all the shootings, we're out there looking for, ammunition, rounds, firearms. They've been very, very successful.
We saw a dog at the shooting on Broadway on Christmas Eve. Was it Christmas night?
That was Buddy.
Christmas Eve. Usually when you see a canine, it's a German Shepherd. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't a German Shepherd. I don't know, was it a boxer? It was something else.
It's
a yellow lab.
It's a yellow lab. Yours is a black lab, right?
Yes.
And we use those those are our explosive ordnance dogs. They're amazing, what they could find. Plus, they're very friendly. So when you do an event with kids, they're not going to, you don't have to worry about them biting anybody.
So introduce the two people who are here, and let's just talk about the impact that they're having on the community, being on the front lines of this opioid crisis.
So Officer Mike Avery Jr. is at the end, and right here is Jackie Ingersoll. And Jackie is a community addiction resource engagement service specialist.
That's a very long title.
So we call them CARES. That's why I said community engagement individuals.
Do you fit that all in one plaque in front of your desk?
Well, there we go. There's a background they've designed, which is the letter CARES.
Very good.
So Jackie's really on the forefront of all those intakes. Her and Cole Welsh, who Cole couldn't make it here today, with the 429 calls for them already this year, and that's as of December 3rd with one more month to go. So they're probably top 450 this year. But multiple advantages to them, but one is we're not in that service, so as we're making calls trying to get people in beds or into treatment, one, we don't understand where they come from because we haven't been there. Two, we don't have time to form a relationship with all the different groups and agencies and advocates out there where Jackie and Cole have the ability to form those relationships. So where I might call somebody when I was doing it once a week, they're talking to the people constantly. So there is something to say when you build your network, and that's part of what they do, of the resources that are out there that I call them all the time, particularly at night or on weekends when someone's speaking to me, say, hey, I have a situation, can I give them your number? And you just talk to them. And that allows me to do something else. It allows my officer on the street when there's an overdose to get to the hospital and then hand the person's services off to someone else. They get back to doing police work. So we've been able to, although there's still a lot of response to calls, we've freed the officer up. Instead of being at the hospital for 2 hours while you work to try to get someone help, you just call somebody in.
I see. So it frees up officers. So
it frees the officers up, and their manpower hours grow because we have the civilians. And Jackie's way more in tune to me and knows so much more because she does this all the time about what she does. So maybe we can talk.
I want to hear from her about
what she does.
Yeah.
Usually we respond right to the hospital with the overdose, and we work on getting them a bed. Like Chief said, they can do their own police work, and if someone overdoses, a lot of times they don't want help immediately. Which I understand they feel awful and things like that. But we follow up within 24 hours. Either, at their home or, via phone. And a lot of times they don't want help right away after that, but we continue to follow up the next day after that, a week after that, a month after that. We continue to keep following up. And then
that follow-up is key.
Absolutely. Yep, at the home and not just, via phone. And when we put them into detox, it's not just detox. We follow them up through the continuum of care. We get them, to sign a release, so we get them into detox and then follow up after that, whether it be a halfway house, transitional support, a sober house, things like that. We follow them up to a year.
How hard is it to get someone into a detox? I do homeless outreach in Lawrence all the time. I work with House of Mercy. I don't know if you know the Carrie over there, and Karina over at Daybreak. It's very difficult because there's a waiting list at a lot of these detoxes. How easy is it for you to get people into detox?
We always get people in.
So right away, somebody shows up at the hospital, or somebody gets arrested and gets sent to the hospital. You meet them there. You can get them in right away.
We have very, very good luck with getting people into treatment.
Oh, wow. So the people that are on the streets who say to me, I'd like to go to detox, but I'm not waiting 30 days. I'm not waiting 15 days. I'm just going to send them to you.
Absolutely.
All right. Very good.
So, Tom, it's interesting because that's the legacy problem.
Right.
Before, when they'd call us, it would be days. I know I've talked to people like on a Monday, and a week and a half later, I got them somewhere. So, one, the network building.
Right.
Two, there's way more resources out there now than there used to be. So, if we talked 2 years ago, particularly when we talked with Phil Leahy, he'd say, there's no beds.
Right.
Phil goes, oh, yeah, there's 4. Oh, yeah, there's 4. Well, I need 50.
Right.
Now there's way more beds, and there's more of a network where Jackie and Cole can reach out to different groups. So it all depends, too. Maybe before, if you were still using, we couldn't get you in somewhere. We could only get you in if you were not drinking or not currently under the influence of drugs, somebody would take you. Now they have locations. While they're still under the influence, we can get them help. So the system has started to build with resources, but it really comes down to, you can give me 1 million resources, and I couldn't fill all those if I didn't have the person who could talk to the other person.
Facilitate it.
And a lot of people saying to you, if I can get a bed, I really don't want to go. They need to have the conversation with Jackie or Cole. So call, give us a call. they'll speak to them. They speak their language, and that makes a big difference. The guy who doesn't understand it, I can't speak their language. I can't relate.
Right.
I could say, I've talked to a whole bunch of people that are there, but I don't really truly understand it. Jackie and Cole understand it, so they can speak to them on their level and help them get services. And you said something important earlier from when Jackie was talking, follow up.
Right.
There can never be enough follow-up, because if there isn't follow-up, you eventually slip through the cracks.
Right.
And I know we deal
If people
with this.
feel like they get forgotten, and I know this from people that I talk to on the streets, if they feel like they've been forgotten, if they feel like they've slipped through the cracks, if someone isn't following up with them, they go right back to what they were doing.
Oh, we always follow up, and we walk the rail trail. We do everything, with the officers. We definitely follow up all the time.
Yeah.
Officer Havey will do that with us. We'll go and look for people all the time. We go to House of Mercy. We do that, absolutely.
Carrie's amazing. She's been on the
Yes.
show. I can't say enough things for her. Tell us how you got into this. How did you get interested in helping people and doing this kind of work?
I'm in recovery myself.
You are?
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind?
No, that's fine.
Because I think it's important for people at home to know I'm where I am. I could be where she is.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. And people know that, the people I help and stuff. I have almost 10 years sober.
Nice.
I'm a recovering heroin addict.
Heroin.
Yep.
And what was life like for you when you were on the heroin? Were you homeless? Were you?
I was at one point, yep.
Where?
In Boston.
In Boston.
Yep.
That's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, Lawrence is tough. Boston's even tougher.
Yeah, I grew up there. Yep.
Wow. So now, when you were homeless and you were addicted in Boston, what kind of services were available to you there and then, as opposed to now? How has that changed?
Well, I had good insurance through an ex-husband, so I had, the services. But I got sober through a Section 35. So.
Okay. And you just explain to people at home what that means.
It was a commitment, state commitment through. My mother had me committed to the state.
So a family member can have someone committed if they're addicted, if they're on drugs. That's something that a family member can do. They can just say, no, I'm going to take this guy in for 30 days, whatever.
They can petition through the courts. Yep.
Okay. And then I assume the person has rights. They get to go appear
Yeah,
before
they
the
can
judge.
fight against it. Yep.
I'm trying to walk for people through the process a
Yeah.
little bit.
What happens is the person, a police officer, a psychiatrist, a family member can go to the courts and say, this person is a danger to themselves or someone else, and give a summary and say this is why, and they go in front of the judge, and then a court clinician meets with them and says, if they are or they aren't, and the judge decides if they are, and if they are, they go to treatment for up to 30 days, and if they aren't, they are free to go, and so I went to treatment.
Officer Havey, how do you fit into all of this?
Typically, they show, with the Section 35, they show a extreme pattern to go. So not everyone's eligible for a Section 35. So we do our best to try and talk to people. And what's really good about having Jackie and Cole is a lot of times people don't want to talk to me because I'm in a uniform. They say, you don't understand where I'm coming from. You've never been in my shoes. Well, Jackie and Cole have.
Right.
So it's just another part. All the house visits will go with all the cares people. The other thing we do is once a week we go to a hub meeting, and our information throughout the years have gotten a lot better. So the chief spoke about earlier, if someone ODs in a different town before, we didn't know about it. Now we know when we're talking to someone, this person OD'd out in Westford, this person OD'd, and it's a huge
So you get more of a
database.
history on the person.
We get a huge history, and it helps us pinpoint where people are. Sometimes we're trying to find people. Parents will come up to us and be like, hey, we think our daughter or our sons live on the rail trail. We're not sure exactly where they are. And we'll go out, we'll try and find them. And if all else fails, then we start going down the road of Section 35s.
Now, do you guys see in Methuen what North Andover sees, whereas most of the addicts in North Andover aren't homeless, they're not living on the streets, they're living in wealthy neighborhoods like Bear Hill Road, $1 million homes. They've got the money, they've got the resources, and they're ODing in their basement. And then, the North Andover PD gets called, and they got to go out there and get a Narcan. There's kind of a million homeless worth $1.5 million. Are you seeing that too? Are you getting more home ODs as opposed to the homeless, or is it balanced? How does it?
It's across the board. It affects every type of person and every different stage of life. Sometimes it's kids who are 20, 21, 18. Other times it's people who are 60, 65.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's a lot. So when you look at, we have a spreadsheet that lists where they lived, where they live, and where they overdose, and the number of doses of Narcan. And we track that, and we do the follow-up. And so it's a mixture of very few homeless for us in Methuen. In reality, it's either younger kids living at home or adults, or for us, a lot of people that don't live in Methuen, and again, that commute through, they're coming from New Hampshire. And 3-4 years ago, there was nothing up in New Hampshire to help them. At least now there's resources where, if nothing else, we can report out to those resources to try to help them. So being that border community adds another element to us. So it's wide-ranging, but very limited amount of homeless. But in the good weather, we'll find people that live on the rail trail, but that's the advantage of why they can go out there and walk the rail trail. But you were talking earlier about police officers doing crime work, right?
Right.
So as I'm sitting
That's
here
what I
looking
think.
at this,
Cops should be doing crime work.
Think about how this grows. Currently, there's close to 400 doses of Narcan that we track. So there's 94 cops. Everyone has 4 doses, 2 for the person you have to use it on, 2 for yourself. So 94 times 4 is 372. So almost 400 doses of Narcan out there.
Wow.
Plus the Narcan that we store. Sergeant Havey, that's his dad. Officer
got a
Havey,
promotion.
Officer Havey, as part of his job now, he has these spreadsheets where he tracks the Narcan, when it was issued, when it expires. Every time Narcan's used, he has to backfill the staff, the load of Narcan that's locked up in the commanding officer's office. So there's several hours of work we just added to a police officer from being on the street that he has to track it. We have to know it. It's serial numbers. We have to know when it expires. If 12 doses are used, he has backup doses. He has to then fill the backup so it's available. So now you have several hours of week work you're doing on spreadsheets and physically counting, going out every so often, auditing it as our Narcan's expiring, telling us your Narcan's expired, turning the doses in. There's a significant amount of paperwork and administrative duties that an officer that would normally be on the street isn't on the street. So you could see it's taxing in multiple ways, let alone we have to pay for the Narcan. So that's a hit to your budget also. But you have to have secure lockup. You have to have tracking mechanisms. There's a lot of work that we wouldn't have done.
How do you pay for the Narcan? Are there grants for that? Is it just paid by the city? How does it work?
So we bought the original Narcan through the city budget. Then we got a large donation through Parry of Narcan. Now we buy the Narcan funded through the police budget. But again, I have to ask for that.
Right.
But so you don't necessarily, as you said, and it was funny, Chief DeNaro was saying, well, I don't want 10 more cops if it means I can't buy something else. So for us, what happened was we put in Narcan as a line item. It doesn't get funded. So the money that goes for medical supplies that Officer Havey's in charge of, also masks, tourniquets, dressings, bags for the car, AEDs, we just draw the money out of that line item. So now there's less money to do preventative stuff. You know, when something needs to get replaced early, you just can't do it because we're using the money for Narcan. But we're always out there looking for ways to do it. And if there's any businesses that want to make a donation to help save a life, we're more than happy to take a donation of funds specifically to be used for the issuance of Narcan.
Now, the position that you hold, Jackie, is that funded through the city? Is that through a grant?
So it's funded 100% through the city. And again,
so I don't want to cut you off. So when these counselors who have no knowledge at all about law enforcement, they're part-time elected counselors because they have a popular name. When they get up there and they start grandstanding and they start talking about how the police department gets too much money, look at all the largesse that's in here. Everything that we've talked about seems to me like a very huge necessity.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny because there was somebody who ran who didn't get elected, who, you know who I'm talking about, had talked about some travel, and the CARES travel, the CARES line item, was the salary line item for Jackie and Cole, and it wasn't a travel line item. It was actually the salary for them. We initially started it with 2 part-timers. It was Jackie and another individual. They were just part-time, like on call. We were able to get the city to give us both of them full-time, which is in our budget. But now we need the mental health worker to work with them. We need another position. If people would take the time to actually pay attention and listen to what we say, and particularly when I speak at council, listen to where these funds are going. For the limited money they're getting paid, they're doing a lot of work.
Right.
And we've been trying to build, again, part of the problem with the city is we put the position in part-time, we make it full-time and say there's there's supposed to be levels where you go up through each step. Well, I was unable to get them to give me the steps for CARES, so they're stuck where they were with very minor cost of living raises. And in fact, recently it took us 2 years past the raises they were due to get the city to acknowledge they hadn't received their raises in 2 years, which were minor. For the amount of work that they do, their salaries should be a lot higher than they are. And again, I thank them for the work that they do, and I continually work towards building that department. This is something that if they worked for the health department, it wouldn't have been a question. They would have come in, they would have been put in a position with 10 steps. They'd get a raise every year for 10 years, plus a COLA, cost of living adjustment. At the end of 10 years, they'd keep their COLAs. The problem is because they're with the police, it's the negative connotation with some of our councils.
Well, you get some councils just hate the department.
Well, it is what it is, and I agree with you on that, but they do an amazing amount of work. And maybe they'll watch this podcast and the prior one and realize
Well, that's what I'm hoping. I mean, one of the things that I'm hoping for is that people who are addicted or who have family members that are addicted are going to watch this, and hopefully they'll watch all of it. But my other hope is that part-time elected city councilors, board of selectmen throughout the communities, for all the 4 communities that we had here today, who aren't experts at public safety, who don't really understand. They think they do because they watch Law and Order, they watch things on TV, but they really don't get it. Hopefully they're also watching, and hopefully they're going to see that some of the micromanaging of the police department that we see in your community, and it's shameful. It's absolutely shameful the way some of it happens. What would be the downside to taking these 2 positions, putting them under the health department, and assigning them to the police?
There really wouldn't be one, except that the health department's not interested in taking over.
So they don't want to.
Has the way it's been in the city of Methuen. Right. Now, again, Mayor-elect Perry's coming in. Maybe he has a different idea on that. Quite frankly, the city should have a whole bureau under the health department that deals with mental health, homelessness, and addiction. It should deal with all of those because they go hand in hand. And even though Methuen may not have a big homelessness issue, I get calls just like you talked about earlier. Oh my God, I lost my job. I'm going to be out of my house. Where do I go? The only thing we could point them to currently is a rooming house.
Right.
So there needs to be that growth of the care in those elements, and someone who can do the aftercare. Because one of the things we've been trying to get is the on-call service. We've proposed that a couple times to mayors. Separate from when Jackie and Cole aren't working, they do it their 8 hours. We overlap them, so there's a little bit of hours. But the extra, say, 12 to 14 hours a day and weekends, we need an on-call service where we're not taxing them. When they originally came on, they worked so many hours, their eyes were popping out of their heads. We need to be able to have a beeper system, and we talked about doing it with the Greater Lawrence Mental Health Center or with the Psychological Center, where we would contract with them for X amount of dollars a month. We beep your person after our hours. They do the response to the hospital, the scene, then they give the follow-up to Jackie and Cole. So we're still working on that because everyone forgets it's 24/7, 365. Right. They think, oh, good, you got 2 people, you're all set. No, I could use 8 people. And Jackie probably would think we could use 12,
because our phone's still on.
They're still calling.
So let me ask you 2 guys. It's got to be very dangerous to be going to people's homes who have addiction problems. They might even have some violence problems, some mental health problems. Maybe they're schizophrenic. And I know you're taking a police officer with you, but you guys are now going into homes of people who have had these problems, they've had this history, and some of the substance that they use, like the fentanyl, the carfentanil, very toxic. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the safety issue of going into people's homes? Now, I don't like to go into people's homes for anything. I don't like to go to people's homes that I know. I never mind people I don't know, right? How do you deal with that? What's that like?
For the most part, it's been very good, very productive. And I think once they get past the seeing me in uniform at the front door, everything gets brought way down, and we just explain to them. We talk to them, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get you into a bed, and we have a conversation with them. And I think that dialogue between us, it really calms everything down, and it gives us directions to go.
Well, that's so weird because I would have thought, wrongly obviously, I would have thought that having a police officer at the scene go in with Jackie might escalate it because now they say, oh my God, it's a cop. I don't want to go to jail. I'm not going to open the door. If they open the door, I'm going to punch the guy. But you're seeing the exact opposite.
It's all how we talk.
Absolutely,
and everyone works together, and we make sure we're all on the same page. We all have the same end end result. We all have the same goal, and a lot of times we're in contact with the mother or the father or someone who cares about them. So everyone's on the same page, and we're trying to help them out.
One is the uniform, but two is the person, and they don't talk enough about that. It's the right police officer going with Jackie.
You have to have the right
and Cole.
mentality.
You have to have the right persona. You have to have the right speech. So they've spent a lot of time learning that, changing their persona as they approach, which is a credit to the individual officers that go. It's not just a patrol officer who's going, although they have their function, and we would be lost without our patrol officers. These officers specifically change their persona, their perception, the way they speak, the way they approach, make the call ahead of time. So they do a lot of work, Officer Havey and the other officers that go to the houses, so that they're welcomed. So there's a lot to this. There's a whole changing. You talk about, if you listen to them talk, you would believe it's a social service call, and which is truly where we are at this point. So you have to give credit to them also, that although they're wearing the uniform, the speech that's coming out of their mouth and the body language has to be welcoming.
Yeah, their
otherwise
mannerisms.
it won't be. Mannerisms are huge.
So are there, you said you could use 12 more, and I would love to help you get 12 more. Are there grants available? If I sat down with our state rep, Christina Minicucci, if I sat down with our state senator, Diana DeZoglio, who I'm going to be seeing probably in about an hour, are there grants available? Are there grants that can be written that can help subsidize getting you more people to be able to do that? Because then that frees up officers to go out and do what cops are supposed to do, which is respond to crime.
Well, the problem with the grants, there are grants out there, but they're driven to the communities that they believe financially can't afford them. So
it's going to Lawrence and Lowell.
They look at the demographics of Methuen and they look at the finances. Although everyone thinks, oh my God, Methuen's on fire. They know it was just the schools. Take that $4 million out. The city's financially responsible. Therefore, we don't qualify. What we do qualify for sometimes is the grants for the Narcan and for other things that assist us, kits that we can give out. One of the things we want to do is we want to be able to go out, do more of the training that the civilians do, and give more of the Narcan away. But when we do apply for a grant, we just don't qualify because it's got to go to those places that can't afford it. And on paper...
Translation for those of you at home, it's a white community.
Well,
I know you can't say it, but I'm going to say it.
On paper, Methuen can afford it, and Methuen can function, so it doesn't qualify. But again, the money's more needed in other communities, so we'll let them have it. We'll hope to get other grants. And for us, Parry's been a real good partner.
And explain what Parry is.
So Parry is the Police-Assisted Addiction Recovery Initiative that started with Chief Campanello in Gloucester and has now grown into a nationwide...
it's not the Angels program, it's like a spinoff.
Well, the Angel program is what created Parry to be created. Parry is the overshoot now, which is where I think we're on 38 of the 50 states right now. I'm lucky enough to have been asked to sit on the national board, and I'm on it. It allows us to interact with people from all over the country. Done a lot of work with Canadian law enforcement, and truly, when you talk social services, if you want to talk about a social service police officer, talk to Canadian police, because that's really from the academy up, that's how they're trained. So this is no different for them to be doing stuff like this. So we're learning a lot, but Parry is what gives us the voice in DC. I've been in DC multiple times for this. The money is coming out of DC, but it's going to the communities, not only in Mass, but around the country that actually need it. But I would love to at least get one more community engagement specialist, a CARES worker, and I'd love to get at least one mental health worker so that we could start to grow and expand the services that we provide.
Jackie, what do you see when you're going to homes and you're doing these follow-ups? What do you see as far as like age and demographic breakdown as the majority of the people that you're dealing with? Is it mostly young men in their 20s? Is it mostly older people? Is it mostly, what is it that you're seeing?
It definitely fluctuates, but this year we've seen about 35-year-old men employed.
35 and employed.
Yep.
Wow. And what do you think that's about?
We
just
don't know
disposable
why.
income? Or?
Yeah, that was our statistic this year.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, that was what it was this year.
And do you guys release those statistics online at the end of the year? Like if I wanted to do like a story in the newspaper and I wanted to pull some of those down, are those readily available, or would I have to put in a FOIA for that?
Nope, they're readily available, and we keep a sanitized version without names and addresses that we can get you.
Right. Officer Havey, you went through the police academy. You decided to become a cop. You thought you were going to be out there arresting people. And instead, you're driving around with a dog and you're visiting people at home and you're talking to them about getting them into hopefully a detox or a bed somewhere. How did that transition happen? Like, was that something that you wanted to do? Was it something you just fell into?
So I wear a couple different hats. I do the cares and the outreach, and I do the K9. I have a explosive K9, and I'm a first responder instructor, so I teach all the medical stuff.
Okay.
So that's how this started. But it is police work in the sense of we're doing this. Hopefully, other crimes will start going down.
Right.
Hopefully, the B&Es, the shopliftings, all this stuff's going down. Hopefully, we're not doing a report on a death, and we're doing a report on an overdose. So it's really important to be in at this step because it ripples throughout everything, and you see it ripples throughout things. When you start getting people, we don't hear a lot about the people who are successful. We hear a lot about the people who don't make it.
Right.
But once in a while, the successful people will come back. And I had a young man, I was watching him up at the hospital. Very nice kid. We're at the hospital together. He's waiting to get treated. He had a really bad cut on his arm. So I'm talking to him 3, 4, 5 hours. And I didn't know it at the time, but he came back and he talked with the CARES girls. He ended up getting help. He came back a year and a half later. I didn't recognize him at all.
Really?
And he's like, I got clean because we talked about it. And it was great for me to see because usually you don't see that. The people who are successful, they move away, they go away, and I don't hear from them. So, but this kid was stealing from his parents. He was stealing from Walmart. I arrested him a couple times prior. I've never arrested him since.
That's
so
awesome.
Hopefully it holds up. And
that's great. Do you guys see an increase or a decrease in dealing with people with addictions? We asked all the chiefs when they were all up here, and they all basically said, well, the calls for services are going down, but we know that the actual numbers are going up. Whereas you're actually dealing with the actual physical people. What do you guys see?
I see a decrease, definitely.
Really? Yeah.
I mean, like Michael was saying, it's great to see the decrease because, like, I got Christmas Eve a text from a person I was helping that I was seeing over and over and over again, and he sent me a text of his 2-year medallion.
Wow.
And I was seeing him over and over again.
Wow. Well, we have to wrap up the show. I could go for like 3 more hours, and I'd love to talk about the whole marijuana thing that Al DeNaro brought up in the last. Maybe we'll do a different show on that. Any parting words for people before we go? Any advice for people who have addictions or family members who have addictions?
if you need help, come see us.
Yes, definitely come see us.
I think that's all of our
Recovery is
messages.
possible.
Don't be embarrassed. Call us. We'll come and help.
Excellent. Chief Joe Solomon, I appreciate you coming. I appreciate, Jackie, you coming. Officer Havey, I also appreciate your service and that you were here today. Hopefully next year at this time we can have you guys come back, and hopefully we have better news for people as far as where this is going.
And menorah lighting tonight.
Menorah lighting.
PD, 6:30 p.m.
Oh, it's 6:30. I'm going to try to get to that. I'm actually going to bolt out of here and try to get to the one in North Andover. I want to thank Chief Riter from Boxford, Chief DeNaro from Haverhill, and Chief Charles Gray from North Andover. This is the Paying Attention podcast here at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, Hyatt Top Two Guys Smoke Shop. I want to thank our sponsors, the McClellan Real Estate, AFC Urgent Care, Marcoux Towing, Marseille and Son Construction. You ought to call them if you need any kind of construction. They're good guys. The Methuen Police Superior Officers Union and Climate Design Systems. Melvin Taylor says we got to go home, Ed. Thank you for your service.
We're going home.
Going home.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.